Hello everyone and welcome to this tutorial. I'm Mohammad Ehsan and I'm a Google Acknowledged expert in Angular and I'm a software architect. And in this video, you're going to learn about an app that we're going to build. It's called Threads. Surprise, surprise, because everybody's talking about it. Facebook, Twitter, and now us. It's just a joke, of course. So I'm going to be building something simple, but it would include threads and comments, and we're going to make this a full stack application. Before we actually start, I want to show you something. If you know someone who understands Urdu or Hindi, or if you do, and you want to get started with web development with the very basic, like just installing the softwares from the beginning, we have developed a free course that you can use right now. It's called the Web Development Basics, of course, and we have more than 340 students right now. And when you go inside the course, you find a lot of lectures. I actually counted it, more than 100 videos right there, which include a bunch of concepts, including, I don't know, talk about JavaScript, CSS, talk about other stuff as well. But it's super nice to have all of that in your bag when you're starting with web development. So having said that, let's actually jump to actually what we are going to build. So I created a rough diagram on how it should look. So what we're going to build is going to be an app that essentially shows all of this. So what is this really? These orange boxes are sort of threads or posts. If you use Stack Overflow, which I hope you do, you might have seen questions. So you can assume this top level thing called question, we are still going to call it a comment. So we will have top level comment and then nested comment. So everything inside this threads application is going to be a comment. So a top level comment is a one which doesn't have a parent. So it's on the top. Then inside that we could have a nested comment. So you could imagine looking at it being something like this, right? And then obviously the other two, if I remove this one, this is actually going to look like this. So these two are actually the comments or the nested comments of this comment, this particular comment. So you could also imagine being like this. Maybe that makes much more sense when we draw it like that. So can I do this? No, yes, no, no, because now this is a group. So it's going to be a problem if I try to do it, but you get the idea. Essentially in this particular situation, if we have a particular rectangle, it should look something like this, and not really. So now this is what I meant. So a particular comment can have writing something into it. It could also contain nested comments as well. And then you have another comment and then another comment, blah, blah, blah. So I hope you now get the idea overall what we are looking at. Okay. So having said that, let's actually copy this. Put it here. Put it like this. Yes. Cool. Makes much more sense. So this is what we are going to build. Now that you understand this is how it's going to look, we're going to use Angular for the front end. We're going to use NestJS for the back end. And we're going to use MongoDB for the database. So we can either start with the back end, creating all the entities, all the endpoints, or we can start with the front end, just laying out different stuff. So we can go either way in this case. What I would like to do in this particular case is to start with the backend so we can write some stuff, write some API calls, and then actually make things work. So this will also allow us to test our API even without having a front end. So for Nest.js, what you can do is you can always go to Nest.js official documentation and see the default getting started. So when you go there, you can go to introduction or overview, first steps. So here you need to install Nest.js via CLI. So you could either do that and then you can create a Nest new project. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually not install it globally, but rather run it even without it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up my terminal. Let's open that. And then we'll go to desktop. And then we are going to create an app. So we can say npx nest CLI new. And I think that's pretty much it. We're going to call this threads BE or threads backend. And this should use the Nest.js CLI and create the new application for us. And it will ask the relevant questions. So I'm right now on a slower internet. So I'm going to just let this finish and then we'll go from there. So what package manager do I want to use? I'm going to go with Yarn at the moment. Let's see what else this asks us. Cool. So this is going to just install everything. And we are going to continue right after. Cool. Now that we have the project created, we can simply do code threads BE, and this should open up our Nest.js project. So I'm going to just zoom in a bit so we can see all the things. Oh, we have a new release of VS Code as well. Nice. Now that I have this, what I want to do is to quickly go ahead and serve the application so we are able to see the NestJS app out of the box. So npm run dev, and I hope we have a dev script. Do we have a dev script? No, we had a start dev. So let's do npm run start dev. This should start the NestJS app in the dev mode, and we should be able to access some APIs. Now, if you look at the source code or the source folder, this is how it looks. So if you're familiar with Angular already, you're going to be like, aha, this is something I already know because it follows the same pattern. We have controllers, we have modules, we have services. Well, in Angular, we don't really have modules anymore, but it sort of took inspiration from that. So if you look at the code, so we have a controller which should have some routes. So it has a hello route. When this is, when we send a call to localhost 3000, which this runs on, by the way, we get something back. What do we get? We get something from the service. What do we get back? We get hello world. So if I go to my browser now, and if I go to localhost colon 3000, you see the hello world. Where is this coming from really? This actually comes from the service written hello. So what happens really is the controller defines the route where you want to go. So if it's nothing, for example, if it was hello, then I would have to go to the hello route to get this information. Let's go back and try it out. So if I refresh the page now, you can see it says cannot get the backslash because I just changed the route. And now if I go to hello, then it's gonna work. And now it says hello world. So you can see that if I don't give it anything, it just runs on the default route. Let's keep it that way, and we are going to add more stuff. So how should things look like in our backend? The first thing that we want to do is to have some sort of data. The sort of data that we want on our front end is essentially an array of comments. So I can basically render a lot of comments on my screen when I see the front end. If I look at the comment object, it should actually look something like this. So if you have a look at this, I'm going to actually go down. There was one more. Yeah. So this is how the array should look like. Every comment should have a text. It should have the user who actually created the comment. It should have a parent ID. For the comments which are top level comments, which are this one, so the orange ones, they will not have any parent because those are at the top. But any nested comment like this blue one has the parent ID of the parent comment. So every component or every comment can have either a parent ID or not. If it doesn't, it's a top level comment. If it has, then it's a nested comment. So a parent ID null in this case means this is a top level comment. Every comment would have its own ID. This will be generated from MongoDB and can have a number likes. So we're not going to work with likes at all in this application. So you can expand on your own and you can work on it after you have finished the tutorial. But let's have a look at another one. So if this had the ID 4a, the other comment could have the ID 4a as a parent ID, which means that this one is going to be a nested comment in this case. So we have now seen two different examples of how the comment should look like. We have parent ID null and then parent ID exactly pointing to the ID of another component, or not component, but comment. Now that we know how the structure should look like, let's actually try to analyze what kind of information or what kind of structure of our database would be. Before we actually go there, I want you to think of the application itself, because that's where you get the information of what kind of things should be in my database. So first of all, if you look at the card here and the UI here, you're going to notice that we have a couple of things. First, we have this whole comment, which has a bunch of likes. So first of all, we have comments in the database. Secondly, we have a user who actually comments. So we have the user ID being mentioned there, or the username sort of being mentioned there. And that actually is something that we also need in the database. So in our database, we just have two things. We have, if I write it down right here, we have in our MongoDB database, we have the user, and then we also have the comment. Let's actually make this a bit smaller. So yes, those are the two things that we actually want. So we want users and we want comments in our MongoDB, and that's pretty much it. Now that we have this, let's actually look at how do we try to create users or get comments, blah, blah, blah. So the first thing that you would look into in NestJS is you're going to look at controllers, for example. So every route is a controller. So if I want a new route, let's say if I want to handle comments or users, I would have to create a controller. And then I would have to have a service because this is the route definition, and the route definition or the route itself is supposed to get the information from the database via a service. So you can imagine the backend architecture being multi-layered. So what happens usually is you have this situation where you have, for example, if I zoom out a bit, we essentially have our, how can I make it smaller? So this is going to be font size medium, small maybe. So this is going to be the controller. So you have a controller, which is your route. Then you have a service, and then you have your database. So this controller is the one that is the route definition. So this is your route, or you can also call this API call. So when you have your API call triggered, what this basically does, it tries to go from there to service or the service file, and then the service goes to the database. The database essentially responds back, and then the service responds this back to the controller, and all of this essentially goes finally to your app. So if I say app here, this is essentially what happens. Your app tries to request from your backend, which is essentially your controller, and then everything gets sent back to the front end. Does that make sense so far? I hope this does. So now that we know this is how it should work, let's actually create those things. One quick way of creating, because if you look at the app itself, it has a controller, it has a module, it has a service, blah, blah, blah. So many things, right? So what you could actually do is if you want to create a new sort of a thing, I'm calling it a thing, but in NestJS, we call it resource. So when we have a new resource, we can actually create it really easily with the CRUD generator. So here you look at documentation, it says, hey, for quickly creating a CRUD controller with a validation built in, you can use the CLI CRUD generator called nestg_resource and then the name. So since we were using npx, what I can do now, I can open a new terminal. And here I can say npx nestjs/CLI, and then I can say, what was it? Generate. So generate resource. And what is the name of the resource I'm generating? It's actually either users or comments. So let's go with, I don't know, let's go with users first. So I'm going to say users. And once you do so, you can also run dry run. So when you run this with dry run, it's going to show you how it would work, but it will not actually execute anything. So no files are created. So let's say this was supposed to be a endpoint or REST API endpoint. And do I want CRUD entry endpoints? Yes, I do. Now you can see dry run enable, no files were written to the disk. But what would happen really if I run this command and remove the dry run, then this would actually happen. So the files will be created. Now you don't see any files at the moment. But what it would do is it would create a users folder inside source. It would create controller, it would create a module, service, the test files for those, and then it will also create some DTOs. The DTOs are essentially data transfer objects. And then we also create a user entity. We may or sort of remove this user entity later on when we work with a Mongo or Mongo database, because that's going to be the entity in that case. And then also it updates the package.json and updates the app module. So any new thing that we create, for example, users, has to be imported into the app module right here in the imports, because this is the entry point. So when you go into a building and you want to go to a particular door, you enter the building's door. That is the first thing that you enter. And then you find, all right, which is the apartment that I want to go to. So you can imagine your app being a building, and then app module is the door of your building, the main door. So you go inside there, you look at imports, and then you start finding more things within your application that the app has to work with. So if I just remove the dry run, oops, let's do it now. Then it should ask me the same questions, and we should be able to just create the file. So REST API, yes. CRUD endpoints, yes. So now you can see that it quickly goes ahead and creates this user folder and automatically updates the app module as well with users module. This is important. If you don't import this, then your Nest.js app doesn't actually understand that you have a new thing that it should work with. So just running this command from the CLI makes it possible for us to create the files. So I don't have to create them manually and still keep the good structure that we have. Now, if I go to the users route, you can see that a lot of routes are already created. Now you can remove the ones that you don't really like. For example, you have the get route to get all the users. You have the get ID, which is a dynamic route, which uses the param ID to get a particular route or a particular user. Then you have updating a particular user, deleting a particular user, and creating a new user as well. So all of these routes are there. Then also in the service, all the methods are already there. Now what I would do is I would just replace this hard-coded string with actual Mongo database query to create a user, to get the user and whatnot. So still the structure remains the same. You have your route calling to the service and then the database. So in this case, I have the user's route or user controller that talks to user service to get the information. And then this is supposed to talk to the database. Okay. So now that we have this route also created, let's actually try this out since we just created this. So if I go to localhost 3000 and /users, you can see this says this action returns all users. Now you could also say users /123 and then it returns 123 user. So whatever URL you have here, it actually triggers the right endpoint and everything should be working. Cool. So now that we have this, let's also create the other module, which is going to be comments. So I'm going to run the same command, but I'm just going to say comments instead of users. And that should create the comments module for me as well. So it's going to be REST API, yes, CRUD, and now you can see that it adds comments. And it also imported the comment into the app module automatically. So now we should also have the comments route, and you can see it says returns all comments. Now that we have these routes created, we essentially have our API created already. Now this was really quick, right? We are already like in 18 minutes in and we have a backend running. We have, we have all the APIs as well ready. We just need to change the code to make everything work as it should, but that's a different story. Now that we have the APIs ready, let's actually go to see how we can include Mongoose or MongoDB in our application. And we are going to use something called Mongoose. So if you search Mongoose, you should be able to see MongoDB Mongoose getting started, and you should be able to see how to actually work with MongoDB right here. In this article, you'll learn how to create, yeah, obviously. So in this case, what I want to do is, let me see if I can find the right one. No, maybe this is not the one. So MongoDB, this should be right here. Techniques, Mongo, this is the right one. So it should be techniques and MongoDB. Now, what you want to do here is to install all of these packages. So it's NestJS, Mongoose. So since I'm using yarn, I'm going to use the different command instead of npm I. So I'm going to go here and say, hey, I'm going to say yarn add and then NestJS, Mongoose and Mongoose. So I'm going to actually install both of those packages and then I'm going to use them. So once you have the packages installed, what you have to do is inside your app module, you need to do a mongoose module.forRoot and then the database URL that you have. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this. I'm going to go here and then inside the imports, I can actually add the mongoose statement that we just talked about. So this is going to be mongoose module for root, and then you can import this from NestJS Mongoose. And once you do so, all you need to do is to just replace this URL. I don't have my database running on localhost. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to a cloud database for MongoDB. So for that, you can go to Mongo Atlas and it allows you a free tier that you can use. So I already am signed in with this one, or not signed in, but I do have an account. So I'm going to go to sign in, but you can just sign up. And when you do so, you can sign up with either Google or your GitHub. So I already have an account and I also have a database. So I'm going to show you how to connect with the database. So once I sign in, I actually see this right here. And you can see that I have a cluster. You might need to create a cluster. So you can click create, and then this should create a new cluster. You can select the free tier, AWS, blah, blah, blah. Once you're done, just select the free tier, create a cluster, and then you should be good to go. Once you have a cluster ready, what you should see is something like this. So you have this sort of database, or maybe if I go to code with S and LMS, this is probably what you would see. You would have a project that you can work with. And then, for example, I have this LMS here for some reason. I don't know why I named it LMS, but here is my cluster. Now, if I want to connect my NestJS application with this Mongo database, what I would do is I would go to connect, and then I would have to copy the connection URL. So when you go to drivers, you should be able to see the URL that you have. So you scroll down, you copy the URL from here, And once you do so, you'll also need a user and a password. So if you don't see a URL here, or if Mongo Atlas asks you to create a user, what you should be doing is you go to database access and then you create a user. So here you can say add new database user. You create the user with password. So you can name the user, you can give a password. And then when you're going to connect with that particular database instance, you're going to be able to use that. So for the sake of simplicity, let's say we create a new database user here. We say something like threads user threads. We have a password that we also use. We can also auto generate a secure password, and I can copy that password. Cool. And then what we can do is we can just add this user. So now I have this threads user that I can work with, and I'm going to obviously delete this user later on. So what I can do right now is maybe open Notepad just to copy the password. So this is how it looks like so far. And then what I have right here is a user that I can work with. Now it has Atlas admin, blah, blah, blah. We don't need to look into that. But when you go to the database, then we should be able to access it via the username and password. But one more thing that you would want to do is if your app runs on a particular, because you're going to be working from home, from work, from your, I don't know, university or college, if you go to network access, you would have to make sure that you can allow this 0000/0, which means that it allows access to this database from anywhere. Now, this is not the most secure thing that you do, because when we deploy our applications to production, we usually just use the IP of our production. But you can just put this so you don't get into issues like your database is not being connected by your backend. So once you have the database access and the network access figured out, now you can go to your database, then connect, and then you go to drivers. And in here, you can see the URL string. So I'm going to copy this now, and I'm going to go to my code and actually use this one. So now instead of this for root, I'm going to replace this with my entire URL. And you will notice that it says username and password. So you need to use the username and password. So I'm going to be using the username, threads user, threads-user, and then the password itself. So I'm going to copy it from Notepad. And now I have my URL string ready to be used. So I can now just move away from this file, and I should be able to connect with Mongo database easily. Now that we have set this, actually let's look into how can we create a schema. So I'm going to just be lazy and copy paste stuff from here. So in here, you can see that we have schemas, cat schema.ts that has this particular code. So I'm going to copy this from here. And then in my code, I'm going to go to users, and inside entities, we have user entity. So I'm going to actually delete this entity because we don't use it. But inside users, I'm going to say schemas. And inside here, I could say something like user.schema.ts. And then in here, I'm just going to paste everything. So for some reason, I don't know why, but the linter doesn't like this. So everything is red, even though there's no issue with the code. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually run npm run lint, and that should fix it. I don't know what it changes, but it still fixes it somehow. You can see that it fixed it automatically. Maybe there's some white space or something. But anyways, so now that I have this, I'm going to call this not cat document, but I'm going to call this user document. So I can select cat, make it like this, and then just replace with user. So user document, user schema, and then create for class user. Now in my particular user, all I want is a particular name. So I don't want the age or breed. So I'm going to remove that. And this is the schema. So all my user has to have right now is a username, and that's pretty much it. Now that I have this model created, let's see what happens next. So after the model has been created, I should be able to just use it in my services. So here I'm going to skip all of this. And then what I can do is I can say Mongoose module for feature. And then this is what I have to import in my cats module, or I don't have a cats module, but I have a users module. So I'm going to actually copy this statement, go to my users module, and inside here, I need to use imports, and the array would have this here. So I'm going to import Mongoose module for feature. The name is going to be user.name, and I'm going to import the user from schemas user. And then I need to use the user schema just like this. And this should be good now. Now that we have this, let's actually have a look at the documentation. So in my service, I'm supposed to inject the model using this constructor, and then I should be able to use it in my functions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just copy this, go to my code, and inside my service, I can now use this function. So I'm going to inject model imported from Next.js Moose. I'm going to, or Next.js Mongoose. And here I'm going to say user.name. This user should come from the schemas user schema. This is going to be called user model. And then the model is going to be user from the same file. So in this case, and now the model should also be imported from Mongoose. Now that I have this injected, I can now use my model. So what I can do now is find all means I just go ahead and say this dot, what was it? User model dot find, and I'm finding dot exec. And that's pretty much it. This should return an array. Now, if I go to my database here, and if I go to my collections, browse collections, I should automatically be able to see the threads app once I start working with that or create something there. So if I go to localhost 3000 users, let's see what happens. You can see that I got an error. Let's see what's wrong. All right, let's see what's wrong. So in here, if I go right here, it says user is not allowed to do action find on users. Aha, that's interesting. That means that this user doesn't have any rights. So that means I need to go to my database access, and in here I need to assign some roles. So in this case, we have built-in role for this user. Let's say add built-in role, and we can say read and write to any database. So let's do that, update the user. And if I now refresh, does it still work? No. Is threads user, that makes sense. So read and write to any database as admin. I think this should work, but I'm gonna restart my server to reconnect with Mongo database. So let's quickly check this out. All right. Now if I try to do the same thing, there we go. Now we get the array. So the key was to assign a particular role to this user that I just created. So now that I have this, I get an empty array. That means if I now go to my database, and if I go to my collections, you can see that still I don't have the threads collection or the threads, even the threads database, not the collection, the threads database. That is because nothing has been created so far. So what I want to do now is to be able to create a particular user. So let's say I go here, and in the create method, I say something like, hey, this, or you can say something like const saved user equals new this dot user model dot, or new user model. And in here, I can provide a document, which means here, all I need is a name. So I can say sn ayaz is the name that I want to create for this user. And then I just say save user dot save, or user to save. And then that means I get a user created automatically. Now this only works when we want to do a post call. So this wouldn't work when we have a get call. So how do we make it work? Now you could have some REST API endpoints that you could make it work. So there's an extension called REST curl or something, if I remember it correctly. If I can find it, that would be super awesome. I have so many extensions. Is it REST curl REST client? This is the one. So what you want to have in this REST client is, if I go to the documentation and look at the calls, you can create a particular file that has these endpoints, and then you don't need a front end to do it. And you also don't need to leave VS Code. So what I can do here is I can create a folder, and I can call this REST. Inside here, I could create another folder called users, for example. And then inside users, I could then just, or I could just say users.http, to be honest, and delete this folder. So delete user. Inside here, I could say users.http. And inside here, we have this. So I can say something like http localhost 3000 and slash users, no ID. And I can remove this guy, this here. And then we can also have the same URL, but with a post. So I'm going to remove the get from here. And then I'm posting a user with the name of the user. So I can say something like I can provide a name or not provide a name. It's up to me. Right now, we do have the user service using the data hard coded, but we could also receive it just from the create user D2 as well. Let's do it properly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to users controller, and we receive the request body when we create a user. So from the front end or from this REST client, I'm supposed to send a request body of what is the name of the user. So if I open create user DTO, you see it's empty. But what I want to do from here is actually something like this. I can do, hey, this is going to actually have a name that's going to be of type string. Okay. That means now my route is configured to receive a name. And once I have that name in my controller right here, I actually pass it to the create function in the service. I get that create user DTO, and then I can just assign this create user DTO automatically, and this should work. So now that I have all of this, let's actually try this out. So here I can say sn ayaz, and let's see what happens when I run this request. So if I get the user, you can see we get an array. If I try to send request on a post, you can see that we get a response back from the API that has the name of the user, an ID of the user, and the version of this document. So if I go back to my Mongo database, and if I try to do a refresh, you should be able to see now that we have the threads. Oh, we don't have the threads, and I know why. Because I'm using the test database, and here is my user, SNIRs. So by default, if you don't give your URL string or your MongoDB in your backend a particular database name, it just connects to test. So what you need to do is when you try to copy this, let me actually show you. So when you try to connect with the string, here right after or right before this question mark, you need to add the database name as well. So I'm going to go to my code, and inside here, when we had defined it, the module and the URL here, I want to say that this is going to be of database threads. And this now creates a threads database. So now if I go back here and we try to do the same thing. So I try to do users HTTP and create a user. I still get a new user with the same name. And if I now go to my database, I go to browse collections, I should be able to see the threads database. Inside that we have the users collection, and that now has this particular user, right? So this works flawlessly. What happens if I try to not pass this at all? What would happen then? So if I try to send a request, then still everything works. I get a response. Now we would actually have two users, but one without a username. And that is stupid. We shouldn't be having that. So this requires some validation. So I'm going to first delete this because we don't want that. Second, you can see validation. So we need to be able to validate that the front end actually sent us a particular information. So we're going to use this class validator, and then we can use the validation pipe automatically. So in this particular case, if I wanted to show you, what would happen is you would have to install these two packages, class validator, class transformer. So what I can do is I can go to the terminal, and then I do this. So I can say npm, or not npm, but yarn add and class validator and class transformer. Once you do that, you're going to do this. So you don't need validate pipe options, blah, blah, blah. No need to do that. In my main TS file where I have the bootstrap. So if I go to my main TS file right here, this is, sorry, I'm going to close this, and then open main TS again. So in here, you can see that we have the bootstrap function. So in here, you need to use this, use global pipes, new validation pipe. So in this case, you go here, and then here you can use the validation pipe, import it from Nest Common, and that's pretty much it. Now our application can use validation out of the box. Now, how do we really validate anything? In our DTO, we can use these validators like is not empty, is email, is a string, blah, blah, blah. So if I go to my create user DTO, just above this name, I can say is string, which means that this should be a string and this should be provided. If there's no name, then the request would start failing. So if I go to users HTTP and if I try to submit this now, the name must be a string. Yay! So now we have validation. It automatically throws the 400, sends the error, and actually shows what should be done. So if then I provide name here, but I provide this as a number, then it should also fail. So if I say send request, name must be a string. It's still the same thing. But as soon as I provide a name, let's say I say something like Mohsin Ayaz. Now if I do this, send the request, you can see we have a new user. Because this was a string, it could work. Now, if I go to my database, I should be able to see 2 users instead of 1. One is me and the second one is my brother in this case. Cool. So now we know how to actually work with users. If I try to now go to this endpoint or even go from here, if I do send request, you can see that now we get an array of 2 users. So our users endpoint or API is actually done. Now let's have a quick look at the comments so we can wrap this up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the comments, and in here, I'm going to also create a schema. So I'm going to be lazy, copying a schema folder, deleting entities. We don't want that. And then I'm going to call this file. I'm going to call this comment, comment.schema.ts. And in this particular case, let's replace user with comment. Make sure you have this ticked in so it only affects the same case. So here, the comment document, hydrated document comment, then comment. All right, looks awesome. Now that we have this, we want to see what a comment has. So what you're going to do is, if I go back to ExaliDraw here, you can see that any object that is a comment has to have a text, which is a string, has to have a user ID, which is supposed to point to a particular user, should have a parent ID, and then the ID itself is generated automatically. We don't need that in the schema, and then the likes. So that means here, the first thing is text, because we want a particular text of the comment itself. Then what we want is essentially the number of likes. So a prop that is likes, which should be a number. Then what we want is to be able to connect to a user, because a user posts a comment. So there should be a relation between the user and the comment. How we do it is that we create a prop and then we use mongoose. And then here we ref to user. So we are saying, hey, this is supposed to be a user, or you can call it owner, you can call it user, and this is supposed to be of type user. So you're going to import the user type from user.schema. So in this case, what we are saying that, hey, this comment has a user. By default, when we save this into the database, this becomes the user ID, but we are defining, hey, what type is this? So this is supposed to be object ID, but it's going to reference the user. And when our application requires it, it's going to send back the user object itself. Now we are also going to define the parent. So instead of using parent ID and user ID, we are actually going to use user and parent in this case. So user and parent, just to keep it simple. All right, now that we have this, let's go back to the code. So now here, look at this one. Now we are saying the parent of this comment can be either a comment or null. So this is sort of the type. But in the database, it's going to be an object ID, and it's going to reference the comment collection. So this is the comment collection, which means a parent of comment can be a comment. So it's going to reference the same collection, but we have this property right there. Finally, what you also want is to be able to, create timestamps for this one. I don't know if there's an option that we can provide right here. Maybe we can. Timestamps. No. All right, let's have a look at this whole thing. Maybe we can do, so when we do a comment schema, we say schema factory, create for class. So actually, let's have a look at timestamps. Now, let's Google quickly. So NestJS mongoose timestamps. Let's see. So this should say schema timestamps true. That's the one that we want. Cool, that makes sense. So if I go with the schema, here I can say timestamps. Aha, beautiful. So here each comment that we create is gonna have a created at, or I think it's created or updated, or both actually. So we're gonna have a look when we actually get to that. So now that we have the schema ready, we want this Mongo schema to actually work with our resource, our comments, so our controller services. So we want it to work inside our module. So if you remember, we did something with users module and we imported mongoose module.feature and then we imported just like this. So we're going to do the same for comments. So I'm going to go to comments module, and inside here, I'm going to import this. So I'm going to import mongoose module. And then here, I'm going to say Mongo, or not Mongo, but comment, which is supposed to be imported from schemas, comment.schema. And then here, I'm going to say comment schema. Now this should work. Now we should be able to access mongoose module. The final thing that we need is similar to what we did in user service. We injected the model inside our service so our service can talk to the database. So we did this with user service. We're going to do the same with comment service. So in here, I can go ahead and inject it. I'm going to inject the model called comment. Make sure to import it from schemas. And then here, this should be comment as well. And this should come from mongoose, and this should be capital C in this case. So now we have injected the model. We can now say find all, and we should be able to say return this dot, and we can also call this comment model instead of user model. So this dot comment model dot find dot exec. So we execute this query. This should return an array. So if I go to my browser and change the URL to comments, it should also give me an empty array since there's no comment there. Now, if I want to create a particular comment, I want to be able to provide certain things from there, right? So the create comment DTO now looks something like this. So we would have to have what? A text of type string. This should be is string. So we're gonna say, all right, in this particular situation, we should have is a string that should come from the class validator. So I'm gonna actually go to user service, not user service, but user DTO. So create user DTO. I'm gonna copy this from there, go to create comment DTO and paste. Copy pasting is what I do for a living. So now here we have the is a string, of course. Now, apart from the is a string, what we want to do is we also want this to not be empty. So it could be a string, but we want is not empty as well. So if I go here, I can say is not empty, and this should also be the case. So it should not be empty, it should be a string, and then it should work. And then finally, we should also have, when we create a comment, we should be providing the user ID. So is a string, and this should be a user ID, or we could also say is a string or is not empty in this case, or both actually. So it's not empty. And then this should be user ID of type string. And then we have the parent ID. Now the parent ID could be null or could be string. So it could be null, it could be string. And it's not really something that is mandatory. So we're gonna just leave it as it is. Now that we have the create comment DTO, we're gonna see, all right, how do I create a comment when the time comes? So if I go to the particular service, we're gonna do something different compared to user service. So in the user service, you're gonna notice that here, we just said new this.user model, and then we just said user to save. But in this case, we're gonna do a bit differently, and I'm gonna tell you later why. So if I go to particular file, which is comment service, and here, now what I can do is I can say return this dot comment model dot insert. Now you could use insert before, but now it's not there. So you can use create. And here, what you should be able to do is you have a create comment DTO. And if you provide it, let's see what happens. It doesn't complain really because it expects you to provide a comment component, but there's a big difference because in here, in the create comment DTO, you have user ID and parent ID. In the schema, you have the user and parent. So no user ID or parent ID. So we need to sort of map those things. So what I'm going to do is we're going to use something like this. So if I go to create comment DTO, not there, but comment service, instead of doing this, what I'm going to do first is to do something like this. So we do something like comment model.create. We take the text from the create comment DTO. We take the parent ID if it's provided from the DTO or from the front end or from our REST client, or we assign null. And then we have the user. So the user ID should be there. Our validation basically makes sure that it's there. So once we have this, then we can just say, hey, we have a created comment. So just return created comment, and that should be it. Now that we have this, let's actually try this out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and shamelessly copy this, paste this again, and call this comments.http, change this to comments, and change this to comments as well. And then we add some text. So we can say first comment, and then we should have a user ID, but I'm going to keep this empty for now. So what happens if I do send request? Empty array when we try to get comments. If I create a comment, what happens then? User ID should not be empty. So I have the user ID as a string, but it's empty, so it should not be empty. Now, which user should I create the comment from? So if I go to the users, I can actually try to see, hey, which users do I have? I have two users, Ehsan Ayaz and Mohsen Ayaz. So let's say we copy the ID of Mohsen, and then the comment is now supposed to be created by Mohsen. Okay, so we say first comment. Now if I try to send the request, yay, you can see that I got the database entry created. We have text, first comment, the user is there, parent is null, we have the ID created at and updated at, all of those things are there, which means that if I go to my database, I should be able to see them. So if I go to my database and if I try to go to threads, and in this case, let's also see users and comments. So if I go to comments, here we have, there should be, or once it gets loaded, of course. Oops, threads, blah, blah, blah. Maybe I need to refresh it. Maybe I broke Mongo or Mongo Atlas. So if I go to comments, now I see it. So first comment, user, and you can see the user is an object ID and the parent here is particularly null, right? Now, what if I wanted comments, but I also wanted the user object instead of the ID in this case? We have something in MongoDB that we call populate, and that actually allows us to just populate the user instead of the user ID in this case. So I also get the name of the user automatically in one single query. So if I wanted to do that, I would actually go to my comment service where I'm trying to say, hey, return the created comment or find all. So when I do exec, just before that, I can say populate, and then I can give this an array. And inside the array, I can say user. Now, if I go back to my URL here and refresh, magic. You can now see that the user is not an ID, but the entire object of the user, which means that if I try to go into my database and actually change the user's name. So if I change to, I don't know, Mohsen Ayaz new in this case, and if I update the document, my comments query or URL would automatically get the information. So all I sort of did was binding the user ID with each comment that is being created, so we know which user created that, and I don't need to maintain the name or everything. So anything happens to the actual user object, I get it automatically by doing a populate. Let's actually fix this back. I'm gonna change this to Mohsen Ayaz, update this right there, and then I should be able to get the new information. So now we have an API that creates comments, has validation, and also returns comments as well. One more thing that I want to do is when we are creating comment, you would notice that the response that we get back does not have this populated. So I'm gonna show you this again. So now we're gonna create a second comment by Mohsen. So if when I do this, you're gonna see that here, the response that I get from the server actually does not contain the user object. It contains the user ID. So when we get the information, it populates the user. When we create a comment, it does not populate the user in response. We want to be able to do that. And not only user, but also the parent as well, if there's a parent, of course. So in this case, what I want to do is, if I go to the comment service, I want to be able to do something like this. So I'm going to go to comment service. In here, let's first make sure that if there's a parent that's also populated, we're going to look at that in a minute. But when I'm creating, just instead of returning the created comment just like that, what we can do is to do something like this. So we can do a then, and then we have some information there. So what we have is here a doc, and then in here we can do return doc.populate, and then here I can do the same thing. I can say user and parent, please send them back and populate them. Now if I create something new, it's actually going to return the populated information. So if I go here into the comments HTTP, and if I say third comment, and then if I create this, look at this. The response sends back the user instead of the user ID as it was doing before. So my create call sends back the populated information. My get call also sends back the populated information with each comment. So if each comment has the user, as you can see. Now, what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to create a comment that is nested comment. So this third comment will have a nested comment. So we could say something like, hey, let's try to find the ID of the third comment. So this is the third comment that we have, right? So what I can do now is I can copy the ID of the third comment, and I'm going to create a new comment that says, I am a nested comment inside the third comment. Okay. Now, what I want to do is to be able to provide the parent ID here. And then I should be able to do this. Okay. So now if I provide the parent ID, it should take that parent ID and then assign it. But I also want to change the user. So I don't want Mohsen to reply to the third comment. I want SN to do it. So I'm going to go to users, send the request, and copy the ID of SN in this case. And in comments, I'm going to replace the user ID. So once I do this, and now if I try to create a comment that is a nested comment, let's see what happens. Boom. You can see that the text is there, the user is there, and the parent is there as well. So I can see I'm a nested comment inside third comment has a parent that is the third comment and has the rest of the stuff as well. So now I actually get the information that I want. So if I do a send request or get request, you see all the comments with the third comment, but also the nested comment having the parent and user both. All right, so if I go to my browser and refresh, you can see that we have the comments right here. And there's the first comment, we have the second comment, and then we have the third comment. And then we have the nested comment containing the parent and whatnot. So this is the response that we actually want to send back to the front end or the REST client in this particular case. Now, the only thing that's remaining is that I want to be able to get nested comments by parent ID, and I can't do that at the moment. I only have one endpoint that returns all the comments. Now, what I want to do in my application is, if you look at this UI, if I have, let's say, 50 top level comments, and I have, I don't know, 200 nested comments, I don't want to load all the comments when my app starts. It would be much smarter to just load the top level comments. And when we expand this, or when we want to reply to this comment, only then we fetch the nested comments. So that means there are two sort of calls that I want to do. One sort of call would be get all top level comments, which I should be able to do by going to the comments in this case. The other one is get all nested comments by parent ID. And that should be the route comments also, but it would have a query that would say parent ID. And then you can provide the parent ID, blah, 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 right there, which means the same endpoint, but allowing us to pass parent ID. And that should just return the nested comments. So we're going to implement that right now. And to do that, what I'm going to do actually is I'm going to go to my comment service. And in here, instead of the find all, I'm actually going to create two different functions. I'm going to call this get all comments or get top level comments. And in here, I would just do exactly what find all does. And then we can remove find all later on. So that means I'm just going to do a populate, but the difference would be if I want the top level comments, I know that all the top level comments are essentially having parent ID null. So if I get those, you can see the parent ID is null here, or the parent is null here, the parent is null here. Only the last one has the parent ID in this case. So what I can do now is I can go to comment service and say, hey, get all the particular comments which have parent set to null. And that would essentially return the top level comments. Similarly, I could also have another function that would say get nested comments or get comments by parent ID. And that means I need to provide the parent ID as the string here. And then I should be able to say parent ID, and this should return all the comments just by that parent ID. So once I have this, what I can do is inside my controller, where it right now uses the find all method in the find all route, which is just slash, I can change this. So I can also use something called query from NestJS decorators, and I'm gonna call this query params like this. So query params. And then what I can do is I'm gonna look into how these query params look like, or I can just take them, or I think it's any, so we can use that. So I can say something like if query params dot parent ID. If it has a parent ID, then what I want to do is I want to do return this dot comment service dot, and then I can do something like get comments by parent ID, and I can pass query params dot parent ID. Parent ID. So that should actually make everything work flawlessly. I also need to import query from NestJS common, of course. So now I have that. What would happen if I don't have a parent ID? Then just get top level comments, which means that I don't have to pass parent ID null in this case. So now I have this. Let's actually make it work. So if I try this now on the browser or even in the rest, let's see what happens. So now that I've changed the default route, if I go to comments.http, this should only return top level comments. So if I hit send request, you can see that I've got one that has parent null, second that has parent null, third that has parent null, and I don't have anything else. So now I'm not getting 4, I'm just getting 3, which are top level. Now, if I want a particular comment that is, or nested comments by parent ID, I know that the third comment has nested comments. So I'm going to copy the ID from here. Then I can go right here and then say, hey, I'm going to add another route that's going to be get. And then let's also say HTTP localhost 3000/comments parent ID equals, and then we pass this. And then what we want to do at the end is have the separator. So now if I try to send this particular request, let's see what happens. Send request, and you see that I've got an array that has just one item. So I only had one nested comment. That's why I get that nested comment. I'm a nested comment inside the third comment. If I change anything with the ID, let's say I add X to it, which means now this is, or not X to it, but in here. So if I change the parent ID to something that doesn't exist, maybe X here, and then if I hit send request, you can see that it says internal server error. So it doesn't find anything now. If I have something, then that works. If I had something that doesn't work, then it crashes. Maybe it would be a good idea to not have it crashing. So what you would want to do is you can go here and say, hey, I have a comments service. And also let's have a look at the code as well. So it says object ID failed for value, blah, 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 parent for model comment. So in this case, you can look at your comment right here. And then if it has a parent ID, then try to have a try catch right here. And you can say, obviously, try returning it. If there's a catch, then you can throw some errors, right? And NestJS has some specific ways of saying what went wrong. So let's try that actually. So let's try to find the error. So HTTP errors, I think. And here we have built-in HTTP exceptions. Exactly. So in here, what we can do is we can say throw new, and then we can see something bad happen, blah, blah, blah. So I'm going to copy this one. And in my code, I'm going to catch this and then do this. So bad request exception from here. So I can say something bad happened. The cause is new error, description, some error. So let's save this. So in this case, we can also say e.message. So taking that particular error, whatever happened, and then taking that message. All right, it seems like with X as well, or with this information, I can't get the Mongo error to catch. So if I go to the service and I looked at Stack Overflow, of course. So if I go to comment service, it doesn't catch it automatically if something happens from here. So what would really happen is I would have to create my own filter and then use it. So I could go ahead here and say something like Mongo validation.filter.ts. This is the code that's going to go there. So I'm also going to run this by lint. So everything looks good. So you can just have a look at the code and see what is happening right here. So we have a validation error, which is essentially error.validation error. So we are using this mongoose error that we are catching, and when that happens we just return a 400 and then we have some error. So you can just have a look at this and try to copy it as well. I'm going to also create a gist and put that in the description so you can also work with that. Now that we have this validation error created, I'm going to actually have to use this inside my main TS. So here validation pipe, we should also have app.use global filters. And here you can say new validation error filter. And here you can import it from Mongo filter. And I think this should be fine. So now if I have this running, let's try the HTTP again and see if now it caches it. So if I send a request, does the server crash or what happens? So in this case, we have the object ID that still says internal server error. That's a bit annoying, to be honest. Maybe if I look at the validation filter, we are using that inside global filters. I think this should be able to catch from NestJS or the validation error. No, this should be the error, I think, and the exception itself. Let's have a look at that because I'm too skeptical now. So if I go to comments, try this again. Now I get it right. So the problem there was, so even some modification from a Stack Overflow looks like. So what happened was in the Mongo validation filter, we should not only be looking into validation errors, but actually just the error itself. So in here we have validation error that points to Mongoose, and then we can catch all the errors from Mongo itself. So look at this. When the error happens, it returns the status code. It also sends back what is the problem. So cast to object ID failed for value. So it sends us the error which is supposed to be handled properly, and that's good. So now if I have a valid ID, it should work fine. If I don't have a valid ID, it should still not crash my server. So that's good. So I'm going to quickly fix this again. So if I do this, send request, I get the data when the object ID is there. If I have the parent ID being empty completely, if I send this, you can see that then it returns everything completely. And if I don't have parent ID, I have parent ID X, send the request, then it returns everything as well. So if the parent ID is a particular object ID, only then I get the right data, which is just one item in the array, and that works. So our backend is actually done. I don't think there's anything that I'm missing, to be honest. We could have like find one by ID and whatnot, but I think our application basically uses these endpoints. Get all the comments or get all the top level comments, get nested comments, create a particular comment and create a particular user, and then just the ability of creating a particular comment by a user in this case. So we are done with our backend. The next thing would be front end, but obviously this took a lot of time and it was totally worth it because now we have an API that works. So let's get to the front end part. All right, it's actually time to work on the front end. So now that we have our APIs ready, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start a new project with Angular, and then we are going to take it from there. So let's open VS Code, and inside here I can go to a terminal and then I can do cd ... and in here now I can say something like ng new. So you can check if you have Angular installed globally, and you can then do ng version to make sure that you have the latest version of Angular available, and it shows you what version that is. If you don't have the latest version, then you can essentially install it by running npm install -g Angular CLI, and I'm going to show you that in a bit. So here you can see I have the 16.0 next, so this is not the latest version. So what you can do here, you can do npm install -g, and in here you can say Angular/CLI. So this installs the latest version in our system, and then we should be able to use ng command. We could have done the same with NestCLI as well. So I'm just showing you two different things to essentially do the same thing. So if I did not have this installed globally, I would run a different command. So I would rather run npx and then angular CLI, and then I would say new, and then I can give it a name. So for example, my app, and then this would essentially run it from npx and not the globally installed package. So this is one way of just creating an app without having to install Angular CLI globally. But this would obviously ask us, hey, do we want to have, for example, Angular routing? So you can see the command runs, right? SCSS, blah, blah, blah. It was dry run, so nothing happened. But since I have the Angular CLI package installed in my machine now, I can just run ng. So instead of running npx Angular CLI, I can now run ng new my app, and that essentially does exactly the same. So it would ask us questions, and then yeah, you can see the same thing essentially. So what I want to do is to run ng new, and then I'm going to name the application threads app, and then I will use routing, and then I'll also use standalone. So previously Angular used to have ng modules, but it was a bit of learning curve, but what we want to have is as simple components as possible. So we're going to go with standalone. So I want routing in my application. I want standalone components. Then I can also define the style. So I'm going to say style SCSS, and this should be good. Maybe it will ask us more question, but we'll see. So threads app is going to be the name. So now you can see that this generates the application. You can see here that the styles use SCSS. So we are going to use Sass. Then we have the app component, and you don't see any app module file. So that's why, that's because we are using the standalone APIs now, and our components or creating components would be like super easy. And this is going to be very fun because there are no modules, hopefully. So now I'm just going to wait for the packages to be installed, and then we are going to spin up the app, or we're just going to open that in VS Code. Awesome. So now that everything is installed, I'm going to open this into VS Code. So I can say threads app, and this should spin up a new window for us. Here we go. And now we can work within this. So you can open terminal from here, terminal, new terminal. And in here, we are going to serve the application. So let's quickly do that. All right, we can do npm or run start or npm start essentially, or we can just run ng serve. That also does the same thing. So I'm going to just run npm start because the package JSON already has a start script which runs ng serve. So we should be doing the same thing. All right. So once the app runs, we are going to be able to see the app. But before we see it in the browser, let's have a look at the source folder. The source folder has the index.html, which is the starting point of when your browser loads the application. This is what it sees. Then you have the top level component called app, or we call it the root component or the app component. We basically call it app component. And then this app root essentially comes from the app component itself. So if I search this, you can see that it is defined, or it's used in index.html, but it's defined in app component TS. So going back to the folder structure, if I go inside app, this is all the code. So this is the starting code, you can say. And here we have the app components template. So this is all the HTML that we'll see in a bit. All the styles that could go here, the test file, and then we have the component itself where we can define the variables and then the methods, and then also how this component would be used. So you can see the app root is the selector here. So if I have the selector app root, I can essentially go here and then use it as many times as I want. And then we have the standalone set to true, some imports right here, and that's pretty much it. We also have a config. We don't need to go into here now. We'll go there when the time comes. And then we have the route. So the application right now does not have any routes, but we have the initial configuration set just with an empty array. Having said that, let's actually have a look at the app. So I'm going to go to localhost 42,000, or actually do this. So this is how the app looks. When we serve this, you can see threads app is running. So all of this is actually coming from the Angular or from the app component. What's going to be great is if you can install the Angular extension for Chrome. So you can say Angular DevTools Chrome, and then you can find this extension. Super handy, super nice. You can see 200,000 users plus. So essentially, if I go and inspect this, I should be able to see the Angular tab here, and that makes it much easier for us to work with the app. So you can see, all right, I have the app root component, I have a div here, I have the router outlet, blah, blah, blah. It's really easy to work with all of this. But let's go back to what we should actually build. So essentially, this is what we want to have. So we want to have a list of comments, and then we should have a write comment component, and then we have more things as well. So what we're going to start with is having a page that we can work with. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to actually remove whatever you see right here with a page. So let's go back to the code. So in here, I want to create a particular page. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open a new terminal, and in here I can quickly say, hey, ng generate component, nggc, and then I'm going to call this page home, and that's pretty much it. I do want to make sure that this is a standalone component, so we're not working with any modules, and then I can just run it, and this will create a home folder inside here with the configuration. So here you can see now we have got a home folder. So what I love about Angular is that we have the ability to create the files as we have in NestJS. So I have a CLI that can generate files for us, and I don't have to do it myself. So now that we have this home component here, if you go to the TypeScript file, you can see the selector is app home, which means if I use this as an HTML tag anywhere, it should essentially render the template home works at that place. So if I go to app component, what I'm going to do actually is I'm going to remove everything apart from the router outlet. So here we have the router outlet, as you can see. So I'm going to actually remove everything apart from it. So let's go ahead and remove everything completely from here. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to be configuring this home component to be used. So if I look at this component, and if this is supposed to be a page or a route in our application, all we need to do is to go to app routes TS. And in here, we can define a route object or route configuration object. So here we have, or a route essentially. So here we define the path. What should be the path? So we want this to trigger when someone goes to our application and on the root of it. So we'll just keep this one empty. And then here we can say, hey, you need to load component. And we are using this because this is a standalone component. So you can say load component is going to be a function that imports a file. So you import the file home/home component. And in here you can say .then. So once we get this file, we want the home component, if I can just type it right, home component class. And this essentially makes, no, it should be m.home component, and we should not import anything. So here we're saying, hey, Angular, you have to load this component lazily, which means only if I go to this page, then I should be able to load this component. And if I go to, let's say, an about page, then this file will never be loaded, which means that the user will get things faster and no unnecessary bundles. So now that I have this mentioned here, that means that if I go to my app now, it should essentially work. So here you can see that the app already says home works. So if I refresh, you can see that this is working flawlessly right here. What I want to do is also to use Tailwind CSS in my front end. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Tailwind CSS guides Angular. And in here, this is what I need to do. So I'm going to install this package, do npx Tailwind CSS init, set this one, set the styles, and I should be good. So I'm going to quickly copy this command. In the terminal, I'm going to go and see, all right, we are using package log.json, so I can run npm install -d tailwind css post css auto prefixer in the threads app. So this is obviously the front end app that we are talking about. And then I'm going to copy the next command, which is npx tailwind css init. So then I can do this, and this will generate a tailwind config.js for us, which is a configuration file. So this is tailwind config.js. Here we need to tell the Tailwind CSS where would we use the CSS, or where would we use the Tailwind styles. So when you define Tailwind CSS, or when you use Tailwind CSS, you essentially use them in your HTML as classes. So that means any HTML inside this app folder or inside this source should actually have Tailwind CSS applied to it. So that's the next step. And here I can say inside the source folder, any HTML or TypeScript file, please use Tailwind CSS on top of it. So I'm going to go here, and then in here, I can go to the Tailwind config, and here I'm just going to replace the content. I'm also going to add the SCSS file here because I want to be able to apply styles in my Sass files as well. So not just TS, but HTML, SCSS, and TS all together. Now that we have this, the next step is to copy these into the styles SCSS file. So I'm going to go to my styles SCSS file right here, and then here I can just paste this. Super cool. Now that we have this, I can just restart my Angular server, and I think it should be good. And we should be able to use Tailwind CSS out of the box. And we're going to see that working as well. So in here, it says no utility classes detected in your source files because we are not using Tailwind at the moment, or not using any classes. So if I go to home and inside here, if I change this to, or if I just add a class here, let's say text 5XL, then this should become 5XL. So if I go to my app now, you can see that this increased itself to 5XL. So if I go here, inspect this, and here you can see the text 5XL has the style font size 3 rem. So if I remove this class, you can see that the styles don't apply. So my Tailwind CSS is working perfectly fine. Now, what I also want you to do is to install the Tailwind CSS extension. So Tailwind CSS, you're going to see that it is by Tailwind Labs. And what this extension allows us to do is exactly what I did. So if I want to add a background, I can do background red, and you see all of this. So this IntelliSense or this color or the names of these classes are coming from the extension. So I can now easily see, all right, this is how the color looks. Cool, I'm gonna use this one, and then text white. And then I'm gonna go here, and then you see that the styles are working perfectly fine. So that's how we configured our Tailwind CSS. Now that we have this, let's actually start styling or start creating some templates. So in here, I'm gonna change the app component a bit. So for example, here, what I want to do is I want to have inside my app component, I want to have, let's say, a div inside which we would have a class. We'll call it min h screen. So we want it to be at least the height of the screen. And then what we want to also have is flex and flex column. So we are going to have two things. We are going to have a header, and then inside that we are also going to have the main. So inside main, we are going to then have the router outlet. So I'm doing this because if we end up having more pages, all of them would have this header. So if I go here, I can now say nav, and inside nav, we can have just the logo or something, or not in nav, but inside header, we could have a logo file or blooper. So inside header, we can have a logo. So we can have a span here, and the span essentially says threads in this case. And now I can save this. If I go to my app, you can see the threads right here. So what I do want to do is to go to my home component and remove these classes for now. I'm going to change that later on. But in my app component, I want this header to look like something. So I'm going to say class. I'm going to say the height of this is going to be 12, which means it's going to be about 48 pixels. Then I want this to be BG Indigo 700. The text is going to be white. So if I look at this now, this is how it looks. Now I want these to be aligned properly. Let's also add some list items. So I don't know, maybe we can say home here. And then inside we can also have another li that could have an about. So here you can see the home link right here. And then also the other should be about, but you don't see it at the moment. We'll fix that. So this should essentially be flex. And now you see threads, home and about. So what I want to do is to have this threads on the left and this home and about here on the right side. So what I can do here is I can say justify between, and now you see them apart. I want some padding inside from left and right. So I'm going to say px is going to be 3. So you see there's some space or some padding right here and right here as well, which is equal from both sides. And now that I have this, I can go ahead and style the nav or the UL essentially. So I can say class. This is going to be a flex with a gap of 4. So this is a flex of gap 4. So if I inspect this, you should be able to see when I mouse over UL, you see that this purple area that shows here, you can see that that's the gap that we've got. And then this is flex. Now you can also play around with this as well. Like I really like this whole part where blooper. I really like this feature in Chrome that can allow us to do crazy stuff like this one, flex and space around. So not really helping at the moment, but I could change the direction to column, as you can see, to row reverse. I can also see if the justify content can be centered in this case, or flex end. Oh, this was flex end. This is a space between. This is a space around. This is center. So I could actually play around with that quite a lot. This is center as well. No, stretch. Center. Ooh, this looks weird. So I'm going to just refresh it, but I really like the tool. So now that we have the UL set, what I want to do is inside this header flex, I also want to do items center. So everything is in the center, and that's pretty much it. That's essentially what I want. So now that we have the header there, you can see the home works right here. You can also notice that there's a difference between the spacing right here and right here, because this header has a class of px3, but there's no class on main. So I'm going to actually do that. I'm going to say class px3. And now you see that both of them have the same spacing from left and also actually from the right. So this is, if you see both of them have the same spacing. All right, now that we have this, we are also going to give a py of 4. So we have some padding from top in this case. Now we can add more components, more pages. So I can quickly go here and say ng generate component about, and then in here I can say standalone. So this will generate the about page for us. And now what I can do is in the routes in here, I can say, hey, I'm going to have another route. We'll call it about, and then load component. In here, we have a function that imports the file of about component dot then module. And here we can say, and when I say module, it's actually the file itself being a module. So it's either the ES6 modules or CommonJS modules, but here it's ES6. So I can say m dot about component, which means now I have my about component set on the about route. Now, if I go here and if I try to go to about manually, you see that the about works here. So we have both of them working like this. Okay. We also want these links to work. So what I'm going to do is inside the app component HTML with these allies, I'm going to also use the router link. So this is supposed to be slash, and this is supposed to be about. And this component already uses router outlet, but the links may not work, because if I go to click here, you can see nothing really happens. That's because we are only using router outlet from Angular router. So instead of that, if we go and use router module and use it right here as well, then we should be able to have the links as well. So if I go to home, you can see it goes to home. If I go to about, they work now. So using router module instead of router outlet. Now I also want to style these links. So I'm going to say class, and we can say this should be cursor, or actually this should have an A inside, which should have a router link, to be honest, if we want actual semantic HTML. So in here we have the li, which should have an A, and then this should be router link about, and I have the about inside this. So this is how it should look: li, A, and then the router links. So I don't have to style it manually. Now you could go ahead and say, hey, if I mouse over on this, it shows us a particular style. So maybe, so right now this looks, how do we do it? So we can do hover text underline or hover underline. And if I do this, you can see right this. Maybe this is okay. Maybe this is not okay. I don't really know. Let's also do hover underline offset 2. So the underline is maybe a bit down. 4. Yeah, this one is much better. So I'm going to copy these styles and then I'll go here. So this is how it works. And then also you can obviously style if the particular route is the one we are at, you can underline it automatically. So in this particular case, you might want to say, hey, if this is router link active, then you could have a particular class. So you could say class dot, how do we go about it? Maybe underline. So underline is going to be applied when we have the router link active, or actually we could do it like this. So router link active underline. So if I do this, you can see automatically it's underlined. Okay. But you could also say underline and underline offset 4 together. And I think that should work just fine. Yeah. So you can see that now the active one automatically is highlighted. If I go to about, it doesn't work because I have not done it for the about one. So it only works on the slash. So router link active. And then I can also put it on this one. And let's see. So home, about. What does this highlight this guy? That's a bit interesting. So if it's active, it applies it to why does this apply to the page that but is it because this is okay, because this is root, so it's gonna do that. Yeah, then we have a problem. We can't really have something on the root. So then I would have to go here and say this is gonna be home, and then there should be a route on the default one, and this should have a path of empty string redirect to home, and then the path match should be full. So now if I go to home and about, on about it does for both of them, but not there. I'm a bit confused. I think the reason for that is if I go to app component, I think that's because of that. Yeah. So if I go to home, now you can see that it highlights on home. If I go to about, now it highlights for about. Yay, problem solves. Yeah. Fixing things in production or in the video itself. Cool. Now that we have this working, let's actually talk about the component itself. So what we're going to do is we're going to go quickly to the comment component. So let's quickly go here, say git, or not git, but ng component. We're going to have a components folder. Inside that, we're going to call it comment. And can we name this better? No, let's go with comment in this case. This is going to be a standalone component, so we can have this used in our components as well. And now that we have this component created, we can start using this comment component inside the home. So if I go to home HTML, I can go here and start saying, if you go to the comment component file, the TypeScript file, you can see this is the selector. So since this is not a page, but rather a component that is supposed to be used inside home, I can go here and say, hey, in this particular case, I'm going to have a section which will contain all the components, and I should have an app component. You can see that this becomes red. That is because our home component is a standalone component. The comment component is also a standalone component, so they don't know each other, and we have to sort of establish a relationship between them or let them know each other. And the way you do that is that the component that I have to use should be imported in the parent component where I am using it. So the home component has to import the comment component like this. And once you do so, you can see the HTML is happy. We are all happy. And if I go here, you can see comment works. So if I go to the Angular extension, you can see that I have the app root, which has some allies up top. But then I have app home, inside which we have the comment. So here you can see the home component has the comment component. Cool. I can have this comment multiple times. And now we have multiple comments. Cool. And this is what we sort of envision happening at the end. So multiple comment components. Now that we have this, we could start from scratch with our sort of UI, but ideally we should have a component that has the username, it has the description or the text itself, and then 3 different buttons, right? So I could also write it from scratch, but I could also just copy paste stuff from the internet. So I can go to, I think it's called Hyper UI Tailwind something. I think it's this one. And I remember having some cool cards from here. So maybe card, block cards, product cards, collection cards. Let's have a look. Product cards, and I think this was the one. So I do remember there was a cool card, something like this maybe, I don't know. You can see that it's really nice overall. So I could just copy the Tailwind CSS from here. There was also one more card that if I can find it, I'll show you that, hey, this is the one. Tailwind product card. No. Let's see. I think it is this one. Let's see. Card, product card, cards. This is the one. So yeah, we have this one. And I think the one I really wanted to work with was this guy. So we can either go with this one that has a title, some text, and then you can have some buttons from there, and then you can make it work. So maybe let's go with that. So I'm gonna copy this one. So if I go to view, this is how it looks like overall. So I'm going to copy this and then I'm going to go into comments component, just paste it. And now if I go to my app, you can see we have a bunch of cards that you can see right there. So you can actually work with your user image if you wanted, but I'm going to remove a bunch of things. And you can look into the Tailwind CSS part itself, but I'm going to focus more on the business logic here. I'm going to also talk about the styles here and there, but not primarily focusing on that. Okay. So now that we have the comment component here, let's actually remove the things that we don't really want. So in here, we want the username. We don't want the by in this case. So let's find that. So by John Doe, we don't really want it. Cool. And now if I see it again, you can see that it's gone. I don't want the image itself as well. So I'm going to actually remove that as well. No image. Then we have some text. I'm going to still keep it. Then you have this, I don't want this maximum width to 4ch, so I'm going to actually expand it just like this. Then we have the date that this was published, how much time it takes. So instead of having that date stuff, I'm going to actually have the actions or the buttons. So what I'm going to do is this DL that we have right now, we are going to have a bunch of buttons. So this flex should essentially be also items end, or no, maybe justify end. So these are towards the end. So I want the buttons to be right here. And then I can have those buttons right here. So in this case, I want 3 different buttons. So let's have a button that says reply. We also should have another button that says likes or 12 likes, something. And then we have another button that says expand. Or you can also say collapse in other cases. So in here, this is how it should look. We're going to style the buttons, of course, but let's take some inspiration from here. So these are the buttons. Now I can go to the UI kit again and see the buttons itself. Where are the buttons? Where's the buttons? Application UI marketing buttons. So these are sort of the buttons that I could go with. Let's have a look at the buttons itself. So do we have any other buttons? There we go. So these buttons, the action buttons, this one, we got the icon buttons as well. But what are the icons? How do you use the icons? Are those SVGs? Yes, those are SVG icons. Okay, maybe not those. Let's see, download. Oh, I like these ones, but I like these ones more for some reason. Find out more. Nope. Maybe go with this one. So view, we have the download button. Let's actually copy this guy. Let's change this and say this is reply. And then let's have a look at the UI. So in here, now you can see the reply button. We have a bunch of likes and then we have expand or collapse. So what I'm going to do is keep the reply right here. Let's actually use the one that was a bit wide. And not this one. View. Nope. Gonna remove that. This guy. So the second one. So I'm gonna keep that one. Let's replace this. And this is the reply button. Yeah, I think I like this one. What I don't like is it's a bit too thick, so to say. So PY could be 1.5 and PX should be 4. Yeah, I think this is much nicer. Maybe even PY1. Yeah, I think this is much nicer. Awesome. So now that we have this button here, we can talk about the expand and collapse. You can use something called hero icons and you have chevrons that you can use. So you have some SVGs that you can work with. So we're going to keep it simple. So what we are going to do is we're going to go into copying the chevron SVG. So chevron down SVG. And then what I'm going to do is inside the button, I'm just going to copy and paste this SVG. So now here, if I go here, you can see the button and the SVG right here. Okay. Now this is supposed to be the expanding SVG. And we also want the collapsible as well, but we can be smart and we can sort of just style it or translate and rotate it when it's expanded or collapsed. We're going to have a look at that in just a bit. So now that we have the reply button and this one, let's talk about expand and collapse. So we're going to go and say, hey, is expanded is going to be a Boolean. That's going to be false. Then you can have toggle expanded. And then that's going to be a function. So what we do here is that we say this dot is expanded equals not this dot is expanded. So whatever it is, we flip it. And then we can use this variable to actually dictate if this should show this or the other way around. So in here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a class, and inside here, I'm going to also use class dot, and then we can have a rotation. So I think it's called rotate 180. So we want the rotate 180 to be applied when is expanded, right? So this one. So I'm going to remove the default rotate class. And now you can see that in this one, it right now already says that this is or blooper. So here, if I go here, you can see that this shows normally. But what I want to do is to be also able to click this button to toggle it. So toggle expanded. And now if I try to click this, you can see that it sort of flips itself. And the reason that this is happening is we have because of this top level anchor tag. So we could, instead of having that, we can say article instead of an anchor tag and remove the href. So we don't want that. And now you can see if I click this, looks nice, right? But I want this to be animated as well. So I can go here and say, hey, this button is gonna have a it should have a duration of 200. So it automatically applies the CSS transition. So now you see it just moves. Cool. Super nice, right? Now that we have this, let's also talk about the reply and the other thing as well. But I think overall, this looks good as a component. I also want some shadow on this, on all of this. And I also want this to not take the entire width in this case. So I think I'm going to go with something like, if I go to home, I'm going to say this section is going to have a class max width should be MD. And this sort of limits it to be this big. But then I also want this to have MX auto. So this is centered automatically. So now you can see that. Now for each comment, I want each comment to have a bit of shadow. So here we can say shadow MD or maybe shadow LG. Let's see how this looks. So this does have a shadow. It's not as prominent, but you can see it still. So maybe go with MD. So this is how it looks now. And I also want some gap between them. I can also have some border as well. So border, I don't know, and border slate. Oh, we already have a border. What is the border right there? Is it transparent? It's gray 100. No, maybe we go with slate and then we go with this. So this has some border now. This is too much. Maybe we go with gray, but then we go with 200. So we have some sort of border, yeah. And then I also want to go to home component and have some gap between those. So what I'm gonna do is in here, I'm gonna also say this is flex column. And then I also want a gap of 4, which means 16 pixel. And now you can see we have some gap between those as well. This looks really nice now. So now that we have the reply and the likes and the expand and collapse, let's talk about how can we have this create component as well. So far, I think what I also want to do is to be able to expand this component. So for now, let's say we have in this component, we do have something that we can show here. So maybe we can say something like, I don't know, ng container. So this one shows, or we can have something simple here. So maybe we can say something like section. And here we can say nested components maybe. So nested components or nested comments. And in here we can say this shows nested comments, right? Just for the sake of placeholder. So here I could say text Excel and in here this. Now this is being shown everywhere. I don't want this section to be outside the article. So I want this to be inside the article. So it shows something like this. So this shows nested comment, but this should only be shown if I am either replying or expanded. So this should be is expanded for sure. So now if I expand this, you can see this coming or going. Okay, so this is perfect. Now I also want this to also have a variable called is replying. And is replying would be false by default. We'll also have a toggle for is replying. And I'm going to show you what is the difference between those two. So toggle replying. And in here we say is replying to is replying. Now, when we have replying, we want to show, oh, why did that happen? Because it's a link. Let me quickly fix this anchor tag right here. So this should be a button and there shouldn't be no href. Cool. So now if I click reply, you see nothing happens. But if I go to my extension, you should be able to see this. So in here, X expanded is false. If I click this, nothing happens because we don't have any click handler. If I click expanded, you can see this changes, or the X is expanded changes right there. So I want this button to be clickable. And then when we click it, it toggles the replying. So now if I try to click reply, if I'm on the first comment, you can see that that changes as well. So I want the content or the comments to be shown when if is expanded and when it's replying. So what I'm going to actually do is that if I click the reply button, then I'm also going to see that if I have changed the is replying to true, then I also expand it as well. True as well. Okay. So if I go here, I'm going to say, hey, I can expand collapse, but if I click reply, it also expands. If I click reply again, what would happen? It would still turn off something, but the expanded still remains there. So this is what I want. Because what I want to have is in the comment here, and this is just me being really nitpicky about the user experience, because in here I could have a section that says is replying. And here I can say, this is where you reply, right? So the UX that I'm looking for right now is if I expand it, it just shows nested comments. But if I hit reply, it not only shows where you reply, but also nested comments as well. Okay, because that is what usually happens on Facebook as well. If I toggle this back, then you still keep seeing the nested comments because you have already loaded them. So the only way to get rid of this is to go here. Now, if it's not expanded, it expands. If I click or if I have reply open, then I can not be or blooper. If I click this reply to go away, then you can see this still keeps expanded. But if this is expanded and I open reply, then obviously the reply is there as well. But even in this case, I can sort of collapse this, but the form would still be shown where I can reply, which is actually this form. Okay, so I hope this makes sense. Now that we have got the logic or the UX here, what we would want to do is we want to be able to have the right comment component. So we're going to have a look at that just now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually go and say, hey, I have an ngg component in the components folder, and this should be write comment component. Now you could call it write comment, create comment, it's up to you. So maybe we could say comment form, maybe component. I think that's rather a good one. So you can have a form that that adds a comment, and then you have in standalone. So this will create the comment form, and I want this comment form to be here that says where you reply. So I want to go to components, comment form, and in here, this is the selector app comment form. So I can go here and say, hey, app comment form. This is going to be red because the comment component does not know about the comment form. So I'm going to go to comment component TypeScript, and in the imports, I'm going to import the comment form component. And now TypeScript is happy, HTML is happy, and now I can go to my app. I can go to Threads app, click reply, and here you see comment form works. Yay! So I'm actually using the actual comment form, which makes sense. And I also have this here as well. So all the components now has the same thing. Now what I want to do is I want to be able to also render the nested comments. So apart from this one, I also would just do something like app comment. So let's say we have further nested comments like this. And this makes it so much interesting. So if I open reply, you not only see the comment form, but you also see now the nested comments, right? And all of the nested comments that you see, if I click reply, you see more nested comments. So it's sort of a commentception, if you will. Cool. Now that we have this, let's actually remove these texts. So nested comments, no, we don't want that. We can also see the comment form. So if I now go to my app reply, you can see comment form works. And then I have the nested comments, which are a bit inside there, right? So now that we have this, let's actually implement the comment form. So what does that have? If I go to my super cool drawing, you can see that it's just a component that has a button and a text input. So we go to the comment form component and we start styling it. So we first start with a form. It has to be a form, of course. Then we would have to have, you can have a label or you can just use a text area, to be honest. So I can go with a text area. I'm going to keep the columns to, I don't know. I don't want the columns. I want 3 rows. And I also want so if I just render this, let's see what happens. So the app right now, if I reply, you can see this is the text box, but you see that this is not expanding to its full width. So we're going to fix that. So in our code, we actually go here and say, hey, class is going to be width full. We're going to have an outline. Or we could have an outline or actually a border slate 900. So if I reply now, you can see this right here. Now I'm going to add more stuff to it. So also make it a bit rounded and have a placeholder right here. So we go ahead and say, hey, in this particular case, we should have, I'm not going to have an ID right here just yet. So in here, we can say, hey, apart from this, we have rounded MD. We should also have a placeholder that says write something. And I think that should be it. Let's see. So now if I click reply, you can see write something. The text size should be a bit smaller. So I'm going to go here and look at this. So this is the form and the styles are probably coming from, if I go to the comment component, here we had the comments, but here we have text Excel. So I'm going to actually remove this and have the app comment form directly. Now I can go here and see this says write something. It should have a bit of padding. So let's also add that. So I'm going to go to my comment form component and inside here we should have a padding. So we can have something like a px of 3, py 1.5. And I think that should be good. So now if I reply, you can see write something. I should be able to write something. And then I have the nested list right here. Now what I also want to do is in my comment component where we have this, when we show the replies, I want this comment form to have some sort of margin. So in this case, I would have, I would not name it nested comments, but rather say comment form, or I don't even need that class to be honest. So I'm going to say my equals or my4, which means that now if I open this, you see this nice little gap between these two because now we have a margin bottom of 16 pixels. So super cool. Now that we have that margin, we have the nested comments. I can open that and that also has nested write something and you go on and on from there. I don't know how crazy this can be. I think I would say super crazy and you see all the nested things that happening. That's what we wanted. So we talked about replies. We talked about expanding and collapsing and showing the data in that particular case. Now what we want to do is to be able to write something, but we'll get to the functionality later on. So we want things to be really simple. We already have an API. So if I go here, you see the comments, we already have them. By default, we get an array which has the text, which has the user, okay? And that also has then the ID, blah, blah, blah. But what we are more interested in right now is showing the username here and then to be able to show the text. That's the first thing that we want. So what we're going to do is we're going to start working on the API and at least try to render the comments on the home page. So on the home page, I have hard coded 3 comments. I want real comments right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and say ng generate service. I'm going to have a services folder. And then I'm going to have a comment service right there. So let's actually have that real quick. And inside that, I want to use the HTTP calls. So I'm going to go there. And inside here, I want to be able to use HTTP. For that, I need to go to my main TS and not main TS, but I think it was config, app config. And here you can see that for this application, since this is a standalone application, I'm using this config with provide router. What I want is something like provide HTTP client, but you have to import it the first time. So in here, I'm going to say Angular common HTTP. And inside here, we have something called provide HTTP client. So I'm going to use this, but I'm also going to use this with fetch. With fetch means that it's going to use fetch out of the box for the HTTP calls, the fetch which is now built in into the modern browser. So it's much better to use this one now. So then I can go here and say HTTP equals inject, and then I can now do HTTP, not HTTP, oh, it should be HTTP client. Oh, not module, but HTTP client service. Now I can create a function called get comments. And if you remember from our API, we had two different APIs. One where we don't use the parent ID, but it's the same URL, localhost 3000/comments. And the other one is localhost 3000/comments, where we provide a parent ID and then it just returns the nested comments in this case. So what I want to do here is to be able to make the HTTP call against those routes. So what you can do is you can manage your environment variables either via env variables or something like that. But what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to quickly, so if I go to the Angular JSON, replace, no, we don't have that configuration here. Okay, so let's do it the simpler way in this case. So what I want to do in here is to have, for example, an environment.ts file. In here, I can define const environment equals, and in here, I'm going to say API base URL, which is HTTP localhost 3000. So this is the endpoint's beginning, right? So I'm going to actually use this environment dot base URL in a lot of places. So export const environment. And now what I can do here is I can say, hey, this dot HTTP dot get, and in here I'm gonna create a template literal, and in here we can say environment dot API base URL slash, and here we have comments. Now if I have provided parent ID to this function, which is supposed to be a string, then what would happen is, and this is by default empty, so if that's the case, then what I would do is I would construct the URL first, something like let URL. If the parent ID has been provided, then I would just add to this. So URL plus equals question mark parent ID equals, and we can also make this a template literal, to be honest. And here we say the variable parent ID. And when that happens, then I can just use this URL, and that's pretty much it. Now I want to know what a comment looks like. So I need to have some interfaces that I can work with. So I'm going to create a new folder, and you can use interfaces or types. It's up to you. And here I'm going to say comment.interface.ts, and then I can say interface or export interface comment. And in here we define, so the text has to be a string. Then we also have the parent, which can be either comment or null. Then we have user. We are going to define the user itself, but it's either going to be, so let's also define user. So user.interface.ts, a user export interface user should have an ID, which is the Mongo generated ID of type string, and just the name that is string. So this is the user, right? Now I can say this is going to be the of type user. And then what we want to have is the text is a string, the parent is there as well, and then the ID of the comment. So the ID is going to be string. Now there are more properties, of course, if you look at this right here. So it has a user, it has a parent, created at, updated at. We don't really care about those. So I think these are enough. Now that we have defined this, I can actually say that if I make this call, I'm going to expect it to return a comment array. So the comment, make sure to import it from the right interface file. And then what I can do is I can say return this.http.get comment URL. That's pretty much it. Now this means that this get comments returns an observable of type comments, which makes sense so far. Now that I have this, what I want to do is when I have my home component being rendered, I want to call this get comments to get the information and then render it. So what I can do here is that I can say implements, and here I can say on init, and here we can say ng on init. So in here, I want to import the comment service. So I can say comment service equals inject comment service. And then here I can say now to get the comments. So let's create a function get comments, which essentially should do this. It would say this dot comment service dot get comments. Then I'm not passing any parent ID because this is top level comments. Then I do a subscribe. And then inside here, we can either just say observer or next. So in this case, I could say, hey, go ahead and try to bing the comments. We know what get comments returns is an array of comments. So if I mouse over this, this is an array of comments. And then I need to assign this to something that I can use to render. So in this Angular application, since we have version 16, I'm going to use something called signals, which is something new in Angular, but it's super nice and super handy. So you can import signal from Angular core, and that means that I can now have something reactive in my component. So I'm going to say comments is going to be of type signal, and the signal of type comment array. And then I initialize this with an empty array. Now, when I get the comments from the backend, let's call this comms for the sake of this change, or let's call this comment is fine. Now I can do this dot comments dot set, and then I can assign the comments that I've gotten from my backend. So in this case, what does it cry? Argument comment is missing. Yeah. Okay. So this is of type signal. Is it because I have imported the comment from some weird place? Wait a second. Get comments. It is imported from the interface. Yes, that makes sense. But in my home component, have I imported from somewhere? Oh, because I've not imported comment. So this should be comment from the interface. You need to make sure that you're importing this because I think there's something default comment. This is the MDN comment. So we don't want that. We want it from the interface. Now it should be happy. So now that we have this code here, let's call this when the component initiates. So we get the comments, we assign it to the comments signal. So this dot get comments. This function should trigger this. This should get the comments from the backend and then set it on the UI. And now all we need to do is to use the signal, which means here, instead of rendering these 3 hard-coded comments, I can actually go and see. So if I go to threads app, this is how it looks. If I go to network, you see that I make the call. I don't get any response. It's all red. And that is because we are not allowed from our front end to make this call to the backend because the backend doesn't allow cross-origin resource sharing or access. So why is that? Because my front end is on 4200, localhost 4200, and my backend is on localhost 3000. This actually sort of replicates something being on google.com versus facebook.com because those are 2 different domains. In this case, it's different ports. So how do we solve this? We solve this by going to our backend, and if you go to the main TS file, and here you can say something like app.enable cores, and that's pretty much it. This takes a configuration object, which is options. And in here, you can actually provide which front end or which URLs can access this application. So we can explicitly say localhost 4200 can access this backend. When you deploy this to production, you're obviously going to say these domains can access my backend APIs. Otherwise, it's public. Everyone can use it. So for the sake of simplicity, I'm just going to put it there as this. So let's save this. Let's go to our browser. And if I refresh now, you can see it works. Got 200. Yay. And now if I see the data, I get 3 different comments that I can render. So these are 3 at the moment. If I go and remove one of them, now I see 2. Instead of this 2, I'm going to now render based on the array. So I'm going to say ng4 let comment of comments. Now this comments is a signal. So I can't just put it like this. I would have to use it with these parentheses so we can get the value of the comments. Now if I refresh, you see we got 3 comments. Awesome. Now what we want to do is to be able to actually have the data of these comments reflecting here. So what you can do is we are going to pass the comment, this guy, as an attribute or input. So I can say comment equals to comment, which means that this comment component now has to have an input. So I'm going to go to components, comment, the TypeScript file, and in here I'm going to add a new input. I'm going to call it comment. This is going to be of type comment from the interface file, and that should be it. An import input from Angular core. So now we're receiving a comment as an input. If you look at the home component, we pass each comment to the comment component now, which means that if I refresh this, go to my Angular app and make sure to save all the files, then I can actually see that app home has a bunch of comments, and each comment now has the relevant comment data right here. So this one is the first comment, this one is the second comment, and this one is the third comment. So all of the actual data is passed to each component. The only thing is we are not rendering the data. So now we can go to our comment component, and inside here you see we already have the comment here. So we can essentially go here and replace the top level text, which is this guy, with the username. So in here I can say something like comment dot user dot, and in here we can say name. There you go. We got Mohsin, Mohsin, Mohsin all over the place. Every comment is by Mohsin. Now, what I also want to do is to show the text. So here I'm going to say comment, comment dot text. And here you see first comment, second comment, third comment. Yay! We should also be able to have likes. I don't know if we added likes or not. No, we did not, but we can obviously modify and have likes in our database as well. We'll keep it like that for now. You can implement the likes feature yourself. Now that we have this, let's talk about how do we render nested comments. Okay, so whenever we are going to expand this component, we should be rendering, or we should be getting the nested components and then using them. So how do we do that? We will first remove the hard-coded comments, which are this one. I'm just going to comment them out. So many comment words in my video. And now if I click reply or expand collapse, you can see that the first component just shows the form, nothing else at the moment. So whenever we are expanding, then we should definitely see what nested comments we have and then import them and then render them. That's the idea. So whenever this is expanded, that's when we should essentially do it. Now, I could use a regular variable here or use signal so I can automatically do something when this is expanded or when this changes. So instead of regular inputs, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make them signals. So I can go ahead and here I can say signal, and this is supposed to come from the signal or the Angular core package. So this is going to be a signal of false. This is also going to be a signal of false, which changes a lot of things because now we can't really do this. We have to change the code a bit. So instead of assigning it like this, we now would have to do something like this. So this dot replying dot, and here we have to say set the reverse of this dot replying. Notice that when I get the value, I use parentheses because that's how signal work. If you want to set a value in the signal, you use the set method. If you want to get a value, you use the getter function. Okay, just like this. Now I can check the value just like this. If the is replying is now true, I want to set the expanded to true. Okay. Now toggle expanded. What should this do? The same thing as this guy. So I'm going to quickly copy this. Is expanded, is expanded. So I toggle the expanded, I toggle the replying. Okay. Now I can save this, but the HTML would have to change as well, because in here, wherever I'm using is expanded, I need to use the getter function, and same goes with this replying. Now, if I save this and run it, let's see what happens. So if I go here, click reply, you can see that now we toggle it. So everything is working. If I expand or collapse, that also should work. So if I expand, collapse, that should work, but it doesn't at the moment, or at least doesn't show the UI. So if I go here, you can see that isExpand is a bound signal that you can see right here. And we have the value that we can also return in this case. So if I go here, is it possible for me to look at the extension or the value of it? Maybe not, but we will look at it in a bit. I know that when it's expanded, I need to show the UI being toggled. So I can actually do it like this as well. For example, if I now expand, I see the comments collapse. So this thing toggle is working, but this icon doesn't rotate. And that is because in here we have is expanded without calling the getter method. Now, if I do this, you can see now it works with the animations as well. So everything there is working. Now, what this allows us to do, the signal thingy, is I can use an effect looking at the expanded. Whenever this expands to true, whether if I toggle replying or whether I toggle expanded, it doesn't matter. Whenever this expanded changes, I get the new comments. So I can say something like get nested, or we can say nested comments effect equals, you use an effect from Angular core, create a function, and then you just check if this dot is expanded. If it's true, then you want to do this dot get nested comments. You could either do that or you could directly use the comment service. So here I can say, hey, I have, for example, here the comment service equals inject comment service. Nope. Like this, comment service. And in here, I can now say this dot comment service dot get comments. And now I have to pass the parent ID because I'm getting nested comments. So I can say comment dot parent dot ID. And this is going to be this dot comment. Now the thing is, we would, or not the comment dot parent ID. That's wrong. It should be comment dot ID. So I'm passing the current comments ID as the parent ID, so it can fetch all the nested comments based on this as a parent. And now I can do something like subscribe. You get the comment or comments back. And once you get those, then you should have a nested comments array as well. So I'm going to create a nested comments array. So nested comments equals, we have a signal. In the signal, we would have the comment type from the interface. So comment array, and in here we have the default empty array in this case. When we have this, then we can do this. Oops, nope, what? This dot nested comments dot set comments. And now when we do this, now I should have nested comments, which means that now I can go to my UI, and then instead of running all of this, I can use an ng4. So here I would say, hey, ng4 let comment of nested comments. It's a signal, so using the getter method, and then I need to pass each comment inside that. So in this case, and this makes it a bit difficult because this is called comment, and then this is also called comment. Maybe call this nested comment of nested comments or n comment. I'm not really sure. Maybe nested comment is better. And here I can now say, hey, I'm going to pass the nested comment as the comment input to the nested comments. I see comment so many times. All right. So now, moment of truth. Network calls. If I expand it, yay, you can see that we sent a call, which is super nice. So if I look at this, you can see that there was an empty array returned. So there are no comments to actually show in this case. And we know that there's only one comment in the database that has nested comments. So the first one doesn't have this. The second one doesn't have this. The third comment has a nested comment because here you can see it by parent ID. And this nested comment was done by not Mohsin, but Asan. Okay. Every other comment that we saw was done by Mohsin. So Mohsin. Now, if I expand this one, you see the nested comment. Yay. And here we also send an API call, but we get an empty array in this case. But the second one that we sent, where we send the parent ID of this guy, then we got the actual response of this particular comment. I'm a nested comment inside the third comment. So now our API actually works really nice. So we are able to at least render all those components or all the comments, and also having the possibility of even replying and then getting it. So as you know, if I expand this, I send the API call, but even if I reply, this is expanded because of our code. So even then it sends the API call. So if I reply, you can see that we sent the API call in this particular case. Alrighty, cool. So I think now we have a good idea of, all right, how this thing is working. Let me also check one thing really quick. So if I click reply, the signal doesn't trigger any other API call. So let's try this. If I click reply, this sends a network call. If I hide it again, nothing happens. If I click reply again, nothing happens because this is already expanded. But if I close this, now it's not expanded anymore. And if I expand it again, you see that this works. So whenever the expanded is going to be true from false, then it's going to retrigger it, and that makes it much easier for us to work. Cool. So I love it. So far, so good. Now let's talk about actually creating a particular comment. For that, we also need the user, because if there's no user, you can't really have a comment. So how do we work with the user? For the application, for the simplicity, right now what we'll do is that when the app opens, we're going to check if we have a user for this application. For example, if I'm using this application, I'm going to check, hey, am I already a user in the database? If that's not the case, then we are just going to create the user on the fly. We are just going to give them a random username at the moment. You can implement your own login. You can also implement a form that takes a username and whatnot. I'm just going to make it quick, and I'll see, hey, if this browser or if this local storage in my app understands me as a user from the database, then I'm good. Otherwise, I'm just going to create a user. So for that, we need a couple of things. First of all, we are going to create, or I'm going to close all of this. First, let's talk about creating the user. And then we are going to go to creating the comment. So ngg service, and we are going to say, or nggs services, and then we are going to call a user service. So let's create that really quick. So now that I have the user service right here, let's talk about creating a user in this case. So what I want to do is, in this case, I want to be able to say HTTP equals inject HttpClient. And in here, what I want to do is I want to say create user. And what it requires basically is just the name, because that's what we need. The rest of the things are just created by MongoDB, which is the ID. So this should be this dot HTTP dot post, and in here we will create the URL. So this is supposed to be environment dot API base URL slash users, and in the body, all we need to send is essentially the name, and that's pretty much it. So once we do so, we should have the API call working, and I'm gonna return this. What this API returns is essentially a user. So let's import the user interface, so we are sure that this has a right type. So observable of user is what you're looking for. Now that we have this user type imported from interfaces and this API created, let's now look at if the user needs to be created or not. Now, when would you want to do it? A good time to do this would be in the app component. So I'm going to go to the app component, and I'm going to say, hey, I can do it on constructor. So constructor. So we only do this once per application. So in this case, I'm going to say, hey, inject, no, not inject, but user service equals inject user service. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to check if there's a user. If there's no user, then I'm going to just say, all right, create the user. So let's have a couple of things. First of all, once we get the user, I want to be able to save that user in local storage. So I'm going to say save user to storage is supposed to be a function that would take a user of type user, and then it would save this to local storage. What is going to be the key where we will save this? Let's add that. So local storage key is going to be threads user. So in this case, I'm going to say, hey, this dot, no, local storage dot set item, and then we'll say this dot local storage key, and then JSON dot stringify the user. So we save the user to storage. We can also say get user from storage. So get user from storage. This doesn't require a parameter, and what we should have here is const user equals, and in here we can say local storage dot get item, get item, and then just the local storage key. So this should give us a user. Now we either have this in the storage or not. So we can return if the user from storage exists, then we do json.parse, and then we parse the user. Otherwise, we just return back null. So it's either going to be null or a user. Now that we have these functions, let's actually make them work. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say if this dot user service dot get user from storage. So in here, I'm going to say, hey, const user equals this. So this is going to be either null or a user. So get user from storage should either return as user or null, which means that if I hover over it, it's either user or null. So I'm going to save this. And in here, if I mouse over the user, it's either user or null. So I'm going to say, hey, if this is null, or if there's no user, then we do this dot user service dot create user, and we pass the name to this user, right? And we can use a random name to generate right here. So what I'm going to do here is, just for the sake of fun, I would say that the random name that I want to generate would be something like this. Const random name equals is going to be something like user underscore, and we can have something between random number. I mean, to be honest, I could just give this an ID, but let's make this fun, and we'll see something between math dot ceil, math dot random, multiply by 5,000 or 4,000 and plus 1,000. So we are saying, hey, pick a number between 1,000 and 4,000 and just add it right here. And that's pretty much it. So now that we have this, we're going to use this random name and pass it just like this. And then we have a subscribe. We get the user back. And then we also do a console.log. We can say user created and show the user on the log as well. Okay, so this is the case. If I save this, I believe it's just going to do it. So let's quickly go to the network tab, and then I'm going to just say, and once we have this user created, then I also want to save it to the local storage. So here I'm going to say this dot user service dot save user to storage, and the user goes to the storage. So let's save this and try this out. And I'm going to also go to the app component. Let's see if I can go there, and I would have to put a breakpoint there. Save. Cool. So now it's going to go into constructor, and now let's debug as well. So in this case, it comes here. It tries to get the things from storage. It tries to look at local storage, get item, this dot local storage key. So local storage doesn't have thread user at the moment. So it's going to say null. Then you just return it. Then if there's no user, it goes here. It generates a random number. This is 3717 right now. Then it creates the random name, which is user 3717. Now what it's going to do is it's going to go to the service and do all the magic. So it goes to the service. It does a post request with the name that we have just said, sends the call, gets back the result. And if I mouse over the user, there you go. We got a user 3717 that is now created. So we log this. This means that we have now this in the database. And now I can save this to storage. So I take this user, put that inside, and now I just set the item with JSON stringify. So if I go to the application right now to local storage, here you don't see the threads user at the moment. And this is from my other application. So I'm going to clear this at the moment. But now if I mouse or if I step over it, you can see that now we got threads user, which has the user in there, which means if I refresh the application now, this will not be created again. So it's going to try to get the user from storage and will get it. which means this code will not be executed anymore unless the user goes to the local storage and deletes itself. Okay, so now you see we are not creating the user multiple times, just one time. Now that we have the user created, let's actually look into creating a comment. So we're gonna work with the comment form, of course, to make everything work. So the first thing that we want to do is, since this is a form, I also want to have sort of a button so we can submit, or we can say, all right, submit the reply or something. So if we go to the diagram, you're going to see that this component had the create text here at the top level, and then it had send inside when it's nested. So what we also want to do is inside the home component, right now we don't really show the create comment at the top, which we really want. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the home component inside here, and just above this section, we're going to have another section that essentially should have the create form, or the comment form in this case. So I should have something like app comment, but I don't see the comment form. So I need to import it inside the component TS. So here, just like the comment component, I need to import the comment form component. And now I should be able to have IntelliSense here. So app comment form, exactly. Now that we have this, let's save this. Let's save the home TS file as well. And now if I go to the threads app inside here, now you see write something up top, and then you have all the comments, and I can also reply here as well. Now, what can really change in this case is the placeholder and the reply button. In this case, it was create or send, right? So what I want to do is to have this as something dynamic. So dynamic means we need them as inputs. So this form component has two inputs. So the first input, what happened to my keyboard? Oh, here. So input should be the placeholder, and this should be write something by default. And then the second one would be the button text, and that would be create by default. So the one that we're going to use for global one, we are keeping them as default values. If someone wants to change that, they can. Now I'm going to use the placeholder right here by using the attribute binding placeholder and just using this placeholder. And then we also have to have a button. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy the button from the component, the comment component, similar to what we had for reply. So I think it was this one. So let's copy this one. I'm going to go to form. Just below this, we have now the button. And here we're going to remove the click handler, but say the type is going to be of submit. Okay, cool. Now that we have this, we can call this create or just the button text in this case. So button text. All right. Now that we have this, let's save this and try this out. So now if I go to threads application here, you can see the create right here, but I want this to actually be here instead of on the left side. So let's go and fix that. So I'm going to actually pick this, or let's apply it to the form. So class is going to be flex column. So if I make this flex, you know what happens, right? This is what happens. So I'm going to make this flex column. Now it looks like this. And now we'll say items end, and there you go. Now we also want to have some gap between those. So we're going to say gap 4. Now we have some gap. And now we want to wrap all of this into some sort of card that we can also use to write something. So blooper. And now we can wrap this into a card, or even if we are not doing that, then having some space, because you see this is being cut right here, right? So this whole thing should have some sort of padding. And if I go here, then is it the same? Because if I go to the last one, which has some comments, would there be the same issue here? No, because we have enough spacing here. So what we can do with this one is have the space right here. So I'm going to go to the home component where we have this app component form. And inside here, we can have a margin bottom of 4. Now you can see that this one doesn't conflict with this UI, and this looks nice to me. Now for the replies, what I want to do is not have create here, but you could have something like send, whatever it was. So if I go here, was it send? Yeah, it's send. Or you could say reply, either of those. So let's change this when we are using in the components or with the comment component. So if I go to my code here inside the comment component where we are using the form, here I will change the placeholder. So first the placeholder would be something like write your reply, and then the button text is going to be send. Now if I go to my app, you can see that here it says create. If I hit reply, it says write your reply instead of write something, and then this says send. So the text essentially changed, and this can go on and on and on. So now if I go inside, oh, this doesn't work. No, this works actually. It's fine. So if I try to go to Mohsin Ayaz and the last comment expanded, you can see that we have this. Maybe we should say, I'm not really sure if we should say something like no comments or something, because right now there's no way for us to actually identify if a particular comment has child comments. We could add that in our code, because whenever there's going to be a new comment created, a nested comment created, we could essentially update the count of comments on the parent one. I think it becomes a bit more complex if we want to do that. I'm not sure if I want to do it at the moment, to be honest. Maybe I will. So we'll see how this goes. But anyways, let's talk about creating a comment. So now if I want to create a comment, I would just have to type something, hit create, and it should work. If I do it right now, you can see that the page refreshes because there's the default behavior of the form. So I need to go to my component, the comment form component, and in here I have to have on the HTML the type submit, which is good. Now I can use the submit event to say form submit and then pass the event in it. Okay. Now I need to create this function right here, which will receive an event, which would be of type form or submit event. And then I can use event dot prevent default. You can call this event or event, it's either fine. And now that I have this, I want the information out of the placeholder, right? So this is essentially the form. I also want the form to be empty when this happens. So I can just do event.target.reset, because the event.target is a form. So I can say const form equals as HTML form element. And then here I can say form.reset. So now if I do this, go here, save this as well. I can type something, hit create, and you can see that the form resets itself. Cool, really nice. Now what I also want when the form submits is to be able to get the value out of the form. So if I wanted to take out the value, I could take it out by doing something like this. So I could say something like values. I think if I do form.elements dot, and then I can say named item, and then I can get the name. So for this, I would want to have the name right here from this text area. So the name of this one would be comment text, let's say, and that means that I can actually get the value right here. So I get the value, or I get the comment text. I reset the form and I console.log the comment text. Okay. Now that I have this, let's try this out. So something create, and if I look at the console, you see the comment text is right there. Oh, the thing is the element itself, or this actually returns the element or the comment or the text area element. So this should be text area element. And here we should have comment text, const comment text equals text area element dot value, because this text area element itself is supposed to be a HTML text area element. So here I can get the value out of it, and then I can just console log it. So now if I run this, blah, 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 create, and I get exactly the text out of it, and then I reset the form. Now that I have this value, what I want this, the form component to be able to emit this outside so the parent can get it. So in this case, I want an output. And here, what I want to output is essentially just the text. So I'm going to say output is going to be, I don't know, form submitted here, because this is called form submit. So I'm a bit skeptical of what to name that. Yeah, let's call this form submitted for now. So I'm going to say new event emitter. Make sure to import that from Angular core. And then in here, you can then specify the type. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to be actually passing an object of having name string. Oh, not a name, but text is a string. So now that I have this console logged, I can say this dot form submitted dot emit. And in here, I can say text would be comment text. So now that I have this event being bubbled up or submitted or emitted from the comment form, any place where this comment form is being used, I can use this event. So I can go to home component, and in here, I can use this event form submitted, which should call a function. So we should call create comment event. And this event is essentially the string that we get. So I'm going to create this function right here, call create comment, which receives the object containing the text. So I can say, hey, we do have the form values, and here we have a text string in this case. So this is what we receive. So now I can say, hey, or I could actually just have said, yeah, we could also have said just text in this case as well, taking that out, but let's keep it this way. This is more readable. So now here I can say text equals form values. And then what I need to do is to do this dot comment service dot create comment, which doesn't exist at the moment. So we are going to have to do that. So if you remember the backend for creating a comment, if I go to create comment DTO, it requires the text and the user ID. Those are the two things. You can optionally provide a parent ID, but these two must be there. So let's actually fix that in the front end. So in the front end, in my comment service, I should have a create comment function, which should receive a couple of things. It should receive the parent ID, the user ID, and the text. So here you can actually expect this to be provided. So you could say something like a type that says create comment DTO maybe. And in this case, you can say there should be a parent ID that should be either a string, and this is optional. So this could be there, this may not be there. Then we also should have the text of type string and the user ID of type string. And now that I have this create comment DTO, I can say, hey, I'm going to have the params being sent here, or we can say something like comment create comment DTO, and this should return this dot http dot post. Here we would have environment dot API base URL slash comments. So we are posting against it. And then here, what we want to do is to be able to take those values. So we would have the text comment dot text. We should have, I mean, I could just use comment directly here. I think that should still work. I would have to pass the comment like this, and I think that should work. And then in return, what we get back is essentially the created comment. So I'm going to just say, when we post this data, we get back a comment which is just created. Okay. So now that we have this, let's actually look into the home component calling those. So what it really requires here is an object which contains the text. Okay. We got this already. It needs a user ID. We don't have it at the moment. I don't think so. We have it. And then finally, it also needs the parent ID. So in this particular case, the parent ID is going to be null because it's the home component. So they're all top level components. So the parent ID shouldn't be passed, but the user ID is important. So how do we get the user ID? In this case, I would have to not inject the user service by doing inject user service. And then what I can do is I can get the user right here. So const user equals this dot user service dot get user from storage. And this essentially gets us the user of type user or null. So we say if not user, then return. So don't do anything. If we have the user, then we are going to say user dot ID. And that is the user ID that we want to pass. Once we pass this, then it should create the comment, return the right comment back, and we should be able to then render the comment. How do we render the comment? Once we get the new comment back, we could do something like, hey, subscribe, wait for the new comment or created comment to come back. Once it's there, then what we want to do is to add that to our comments signal. So we already render a bunch of comments. If we create a new one, let's just bring the latest one to the top. So we are going to do something like this, dot comments dot set. And in here, what we want to do is to push or to have this one, the created comment at the top, and then every comment that we already have, this dot comments after it. So look at this again, we are using the getter to get the value. So now that we have this, let's try creating a comment and see how it works. So I'm going to go to sources, and inside here, I'm going to put some breakpoints. So let's go to the home component, and in here, let's go to the create comment component right here. So now if I say something like, this is my top level comment, and if I hit create, you see that we eventually get here. You can essentially track how we got here. So from the comment form component, when we submit, this form submit method gets called. Then we emit the comment text after we have gotten it from the text area element. And then we essentially get this event triggered, form submitted, that calls create comment. And then in here, we get the text finally. So it's the whole journey right here. So if I take out the text, this is my top level comment. Then I'm getting the user. So I get the user from his storage. I have the user. I have the username as well. And then finally, I also have the user ID. And then what I do here is if I go forward, I can go to comment service, create comment. And then I go there. I have the post with the comment details. So text and user ID both are there. I should be able to make the call, and then I should be able to get the data back. So if I make the call, everything works nicely. And if I see the comment, we have the status 201, which means it was created. If I go here, you see that this is my top level comment has been created with the parent being null and the user being user 3717. Yay! The backend was ready. We just implemented the front end. Now I can take that created comment and push that into the UI. So if I just hit the play button, there you go. User 317, we already have the comment. Now you'll see a problem when we refresh. This would actually go all the way to the bottom because the data that we get from the backend when we request the comments is sorted based on the created ad, but towards the wrong side of it, so to say. So it doesn't, so it's not in ascending order, or it should be in the descending order based on the latest being the first one and then the oldest being the last one. How can we fix that? We can go to our backend and then inside the comment service where we try to return the top level comments after the find or even after the populate, you could actually do sort. And in here, you can either do ID or you could do created at. And here you can do -1. And I think this should actually work. So let's try this out now. So now if I refresh this, you can see that the latest comment now is this one. This is the top level comment. So yes, created at -1 means in descending order. So the latest one is going to be the first one. Now let's also do this for the other ones. So get comments by parent ID should also be sorted based on the same criteria. So you populate, you sort it. And then I think we should be good because the create doesn't need anything else. Cool. Now that we have this implemented, let's actually check this out. So I'm going to go and refresh this user 317. Let's also say this is also my comment. And then if I add it, I should go through all the process, but then it should be added right here. So this is also my comment. If I refresh this, still stays there, still the same consistent sequence. Really cool. Now what I want to do is to reply to this third comment. So if I go here and try to create it, it probably wouldn't work, or it most likely wouldn't work because we have no logic that handles what happens if you try to reply to someone. Because what we handled so far is in our home component. Where is it? This is the backend code. This is the front end code. So in my home component, when the form sort of emits this event, then I create the comment. So this is what I want in my nested replies as well. So what I'm going to do is close all of this. I'm going to go to my comment component, which uses the form right here. And now here I need to handle this form submitted event. So when this comment form is submitted, I need to create a comment. So I'm going to create this function right here. this should do exactly what we are doing in the home components. I'm going to copy paste a bunch of stuff from there. So I'm going to copy this. I'm going to copy this and paste this right here. And then I'm going to also inject the user service. So user service equals inject user service, this guy. And then if I look at the comments right here, you notice that I can get the text from the form values similar to how I do it in the user form. I still get the user. I still use the comment service.create comment, but here, apart from user ID, I also add the parent ID, which should be this dot comment.id. So we add it right here. Okay. Now that we add it right here, when we get the nested reply created, then we should be adding this to the nested comment signal because there's no comments array here or no comment signal here. So nested comments, easy peasy, lemon squeezy. And now I can go to the UI and see it working. So now if I go here, I want to reply to the third comment, which already has a reply. So I'm on nested comment inside the third comment, but now here I can reply to this third comment from Mosin. So I can say something like, but my comment is just much better. And now if I just create it, let's see what happens. Send. And there you go. Now you can see that apart from this nested comment already, I see my comment is just much better. The form was resetted. Super nice. And now if I refresh this, I can check this again. So Mosin has both of these comments, and now I can go and do a nested comment in here, and this can go on and on and on. But I have now the ability to create nested comments. I have the ability to create a top level comment as well. So everything just works magically. Let's go to the code and see if you're missing anything. So we are now able to handle both the nested comments. So we can add and create top level comments. We can have nested comments as well. We also discussed about let's actually have a look. So one of the things that I also just recalled right now is, since we are using ng4 in multiple places when you're working with performance, of course, what you need to do is to use a track by in this case. So you should be able to say track. And I think, was this? No, but that was the proposal in the RFC. So I would have to have a track by function, and I would have to then give it that as well. So in this case, I would have to have, hey, comment track by, which should receive a comment of type comment, and then you just return the comment.id, and then I can use this right here as this, and I think everything should be good. So this is the home component. Go here. Yes. So now if I refresh, the track by can't bind to NG4. What? Wait a second. Is my Angular knowledge rusty? Angular track by. Go to the Angular docs. This guy. Track by function. Yes. Give me an example. Yes. Yeah. So you have the user track by here. Index and okay. So it should be index and the user. So okay. But then what? Track by, comment track by. Comment track by. Go here. This should be the index, and then this should be the comment. Yes, I know I think it should have type number. But why do you cry? Is it because what? Why? Comment from component. Is it because, so this looks at the home component. I go to the home component. Comment track by function. Confused right now. Let's have a look at the track by, and there's also about 1:15 a.m. So that's probably why. By track by function. It's track by. It's not track by function. That's why. Make it fix. Cool. So not so rusty after all. Cool. So now that we have the track by working, we should also have the same thing in the comments component as well. So in here, I'm gonna go and do this guy. We have here, so there we should have track by, comment track by, and then we create that component right here. Comment track by should receive a comment of type comment, return comment, return comment dot id, and this should be index of type number, but we don't use it. Maybe do underscore. This should be good. Comment id. I think we are good. And in here also, let's save this. So if I go to see the replies, I see the comments, and I can also say here, but sometimes I don't know why my code works. Let's send it. Cool. I think that completely makes sense. It also reflects a lot of in-depth knowledge about myself. Cool. But sometimes I don't know why my code works. All right. So now our application looks actually nice. So what I want you to do is to go to github.com/asanias. And if you found this video useful, try following me right there. Press the thumbs up button, share this video with others, and let them know if this was nice or not. And let me know in the comments what was the best part that you found of this video, and if you liked it at all. All right, so I hope you liked the video. If you did, press the thumbs up button. And also I wanted to share something with you. If you know and understand Urdu or Hindi, or if you know someone who understands it, me and my team has worked on this whole new course in which we are working with web development basics. So we start from ground up, from the point where you don't even have the softwares installed in your machine to get started with web development. We talk about HTML, we talk about JavaScript, we talk about something advanced related, or some things which are a bit more advanced in JavaScript and CSS3 as well. And then we end with just a project or a bunch of activities and projects that actually help you understand the concept, but also to sort of build your portfolio that you can show off to others. So if you want to join, all you need to do is to go to codewithsn.dev to the courses, and you can enroll yourself. We have more than 300 people already following this course and sort of making their web journey possible. So if you're interested, make sure to join this or share with others. With that said, as always, happy coding, and I'm going to see you in the next video.